We are live. Professor Hannick, can you hear me? Let me unmute you. Professor Hannick, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Louis Marinelli, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Louis, can you hear the professor?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. One second. So we apologize for the difficulties. Don't know what happened at all. Just like the first time we did StreamYard, where they created two separate links, which isn't supposed to happen. StreamYard did a new thing where they shut down one of our links while it was live. So not sure how that happens or why. Interesting technology. We're going to get right into the debate. So we are about 11 minutes behind, but that's fine. I'm going to do a commercial. Then we're going to cut and go live stream to this. Give me 1 minute to make sure I can send this invite to everyone, and we'll go from there. Okay. Okay. I'm going to go to the commercial. When I come out, I will introduce the show for both candidates. I will let you do a 2-minute opening statement for both candidates, and then we will start a series of questions. Thank you for patience. Thank you for the audience. Okay, let's go right to the commercial. We'll come right back out.
Marcus, can you send the link for YouTube?
Can I send the link for YouTube?
Yeah, so people can watch it.
Yes,
Jason just sent it to me.
Okay.
We're all good.
No offense, I'm going to get started with the debate. It's enough technological hiccups. I want to get on time, so I understand it's not everything everybody wanted. We have additional debates at 2 p.m. and 3, and I need to notify those two candidates. So with respect, I'm going to start the debate now for 30 minutes. I apologize for any difficulties. Now that the commercial's over, we are having a special one-on-one debate between two recall candidates, Professor James Hannick, a professor of philosophy, who's also appeared in the Yes California recall candidate debates, and Louis Marinelli, who's a candidate and is declared running for the recall election. Yes California's had multiple panels of about half of the recall candidate debates. That is a separate standalone debate series where we ask any candidate only general questions related to the recall election. On top of that, we've recently offered each candidate to be able to challenge any other candidate to a debate on any subject that they want. The only rule is that the candidate has to agree. Knowing this, candidate Louis Marinelli asked to debate Professor James Hannick on the topic of California acting like a nation, or does California already operate as a nation? We have a series of questions that will be asked from me to each candidate. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer, and then we will ask each candidate after they have answered what they think of the other candidate's answer, so that we can have interaction between the candidates and a lively discussion for you, the public, to be educated. Starting off now, we're going to go to Professor Hannick with a 2-minute general introduction to the idea of, is California more like a nation than a state, or is it not? The professor can add anything he would like to his 2-minute introduction. Professor James Hannick.
Thanks very much for this opportunity. I'm Jim Hannick. I live in Inglewood, California. I taught for 4 decades at Loyola Marymount University. I'm married. My wife and I have 6 children, and I teach philosophy. And people say, "What is philosophy?" And we in the American Solidarity Party pride ourselves on asking philosophical questions. Sad to say, a lot of people try to avoid philosophical questions, but we try to ask them. And it's certainly a philosophical question, a question that requires hard thinking. What's the difference between a nation and a state? and it's maybe even tougher because it's more particular to answer the question whether or not California is more like a nation or a state. Now, my starting point would be this. Nations are more important than states, and nations can live on without a state. Poland, for example, for well over 100 years was very definitely a nation without being a state. And it can be the case that in one state, a number of nations are present. And I would think that that could even be true of California. Now, I would say right now that California is much more like a state than like a nation. I think California is, what should I say, a patchwork of different ethnicities, different religions, different cultures. And I think it's a patchwork that from time to time is tearing at the seams. So I think it doesn't have the cohesion that a state would have, that a nation would have. It does not have the cohesion that a nation would have. And I think that makes its existence more fragile. I'd say that California is more like a state than like a nation.
Okay. Louis Marinelli, you are declared candidate for the governorship of California, and you have said that independence is your main platform. The question is to you, a 2-minute introductory statement to cover yourself as a candidate or talk about the topic in general. Is California more like a nation than a state? Louis Marinelli.
Well, I think that California is more of a state than a nation, to be honest with you, because nation, I don't think, is what we're trying to define as California in the terms of becoming an independent. We want California to become an independent country. And like Mr. Hannock was saying, that country will consist of several nations within it, or may consist of several nations within it. When we're talking about a nation, we're talking about groups of people with a common history, common background, common language, some commonality between them. That's what makes them a nation. And so I think that the Californian population is a separate nation from the American nation, so to speak. But within the Californian nation, there are different sub-nations, let's say, that make up the 40 million Californians who live on the West Coast, quite isolated, if you might say, from the American population, because most of the American population lives east of the Mississippi. And then there's 1,000 miles of mountains and deserts. And then there's this massive new population of California. And so when you have that kind of isolation of two populations from each other, you inevitably have a divergence of culture and language and history, etc. So California is, the California nation, I guess, is a distinct society from the American nation and society. So from that context, I think that we have the grounds to declare ourselves a distinct society, like Quebec in Canada, like Catalonia in Spain, Scotland in the UK. And so from those grounds, we're talking about California as a nation, so to speak. But I don't use the word nation as in terms of or synonymous with country. We want California to become an independent country, not so much an independent nation. And so I would just, as a person who's taught language for several years, I tend to like to point out the difference between nations and states and countries. We're trying to make California an independent country. Within that independent country, there may be several nations, and it will be, as I might just add here at the end, a state in the context that it'll be the 194th member state of the United Nations.
Thank you. Professor Hannock, you have 1 minute to respond to what candidate Marinelli said. Afterwards, we'll give him 1 minute to respond to what you said. Do you agree with candidate Marinelli, disagree, or have a different take? Professor Hannock.
I think he introduces an important distinction, the idea of a country. We oftentimes recognize countries to have internal to themselves different states. So the United States is a country, and internal to this country, there are a range of states. I'm more inclined to use the word state than country, and I suppose that's because of the historical precedents. There's all sorts of philosophy that focuses on the state, and not so much that would focus on a country as such. I think one of the questions that is experiential here and now is that whatever we are in California, I think the United States of America, and not just the United States of America, but the contemporary industrial nation state flattens our experience. When I go to a mall here in California and I go to a mall in Kansas, I'm likely to see the same stores. When I go to a hotel in California and I go to a hotel in Rhode Island and I turn on the television, I'm apt to see pretty much the same shows and pretty much the same tensions. I think there's a terrible flattening in the large nation state. And insofar as I'm sympathetic to Mr. Marinelli's position, insofar as I'm sympathetic, it's because I would like to avoid that flattening. Among other things, I would like to avoid that flattening. And the philosophical principle that I'm drawing here from is
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Thank you. We want to keep the responses to a few minutes. Louis Marinelli, you have 2 minutes to respond to the professor. You can agree, disagree, or say something totally different. Candidate Marinelli.
Well, again, I think that we basically agree on the fact that, well, what defines a nation. I think that the difference might be whether or not the nation state may exist with the hype in there. But I would say not necessarily so in the case of California, because I would say that California has more than one nation with it. There's always talks in California, for example, of breaking California up into different states. Why is that? Well, because there's different cultures in California. Northern California is vastly different from Southern California. The Bay Area is different from the Central Valley. And so those are kind of even micro nations, I would even say. But we're not trying to make these micronations into a country. We're trying to make all of it into a country, as in a country of California, as a state, as a member state of the United Nations from that context of a state with a capital S, so to speak. And I would also, just point out that the professor was starting to mention about how he could travel from state to state in the United States and see the same kind of stores. Well, I'm in Moscow, Russia right now, and I can go to a mall and I can go to Papa John's. I can go to the mall and I can eat pizza, Domino's Pizza, McDonald's, Burger King. So just because the prevalence and the existence of stores and businesses in one state and another state, I don't think that speaks to the fact that there's one nation. Certainly, Russia is not the same nation as the United States or California.
Interesting. Okay. The next question is this one. Whether or not California is a nation, or will be, the fact is that 3 separate governors in a row, starting with Schwarzenegger, then Brown, then Newsom, have all referred to California as a nation state. 3 separate governors. That's almost a period of 15 years of the top executive referring to us as basically a nation state. Were the governors wrong to do that? Professor Hanek. I'm sorry. Let me unmute you. I apologize. Professor Hanek.
I don't think that California is a nation state, and much depends on people's motives. I suspect that the governors who call California a nation state suffer from big-itis and a sense of self-importance, at least a sense of self-importance that they can have if they treat this state as a nation state. We're dependent on the United States in an innumerable number of ways. We can't really present ourselves as a nation state. I think it was a kind of verbal inflation, and an awful lot of political discourse suffers from verbal inflation. And one modest role that philosophers can play is to blow the whistle on the misuse of language. Now, whether Russia is the same as the United States in terms of commercial culture, we know one thing is different. There are no open secession movements in Russia.
Okay. Candidate Marinelli, 3 separate governors referred to California as a nation state, showing a continuity of the top executive over multiple administrations in over 12 years, period. Were they wrong to do that?
Well, I don't think they were wrong to do that because we're talking about freedom of speech. They can, of course, say whatever they want to say. This debate and the discussion could really be about whether their statement was accurate, I guess. Jerry Brown, for example, I like to point out because he kind of knew going into it that what he was going to say was bold. I mean, I think he said word for word, it may be kind of bold to say it, but California is a separate nation. And what he had in mind there was not that it was a separate country to that effect as we're talking about now, but he said that it was about a different state of mind, that there's a California state of mind which is different from the American state of mind, for example, or from any other country for that matter. And so that kind of speaks to what I was talking about before, that California is a distinct society. We have a California state of mind. It's different from the American state of mind. That's why when you talk to Americans about the politics in California, they laugh at it and they're crazy. They call California the land of fruits and nuts. That's because our mentality in California is vastly different on many topics from that of the American mentality. And that doesn't mean that because we're similar to the Americans in many ways that we're not a separate nation, because you can find many ways in which the people of Canada and the people of America are similar, but there's 2 separate countries. We are in fact on one continent, so we're bound to have some commonality there. In fact, many of the people who settled in California came from the United States. They're American citizens, American settlers. So yes, we're going to have some commonality, a lot of commonality. That doesn't detract from the fact that we are a separate society, a distinct society, a separate nation in the context that we are different in many ways from the American nation. If you talk about history, where did the United States come from? Where did California come from? What language do they speak in the United States? What language do they speak in California? What are the demographics of the United States? What are the demographics of California? They're very different in many ways. And so therefore, we talk about California as a separate nation. Therefore, I don't think it's wrong to say that California is a nation state or should be a nation state.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Hanik, 1 minute to respond.
We do hear the expression, as California goes, so goes the nation. I would hope not. I would like to see way more plurality of cultures than we supposedly import from California. But within California, I don't share the same state of mind as the governor does. I certainly don't share the same state of mind as our senators do, or our Democrat leadership, or our Republican leadership. I think California is wildly inconsistent on the dignity of the human person, and is really reflective of a kind of late stage capitalism that overall tends to destroy cultures that need to be surviving and flourishing.
Okay. Candidate Marinelli, a 1 minute response to the response to you, if you would like.
I think that, of course, you're going to see variety and diversity in a society. Just say that California, we have a Californian state of mind, so to speak, and that's different from the American mentality. Doesn't mean that everybody in California is going to share that mentality as a, so to speak, Californian state of mind. But that's a general trend. It's a general idea that, if you talk about, for example, you mentioned the Republican Party. Well, if you look at typical California Republicans, they're quite different from Republicans in the rest of the country. And red states, for example, they're much more liberal on several different topics. So they may be Republicans, and they may not agree with everything that the Democratic governors and leadership in California do, but they're still different in some way from the rest of the Americans. So that kind of speaks to this, different mentality in California. They can still be different from other Californians, But all of us in California are different in many ways from the American, from the other side of that border. When you start going into places like Arizona, and Texas, Louisiana, Tennessee, it's a different state of mind on many topics.
Thank you. Thank you both. We're going to go to the next question now. It comes with an introduction. Let me pull that up. Sorry. In November 2016, after a majority of the Electoral College of America chose Donald Trump as president, Kevin De Leon was the third highest ranking California politician in the government of California at that time. He said this the day after Trump was elected: "We woke up feeling like strangers in a foreign land, because yesterday Americans expressed their views on a pluralistic and democratic society that are clearly inconsistent with the values of California." Third highest ranking member of the California government said that the day after Trump was elected. In January 2021, the Public Policy Institute of California, the most reputable think tank attached to the California government, did a survey of likely California voters. 59% of likely California voters said they had very little faith that America would not continue to stay divided. 59% of California voters, January 2021, said they believed America will continue to stay divided. Now, in March 2021, the PPIC asked a similar question: "Are you pessimistic about the chances of Americans seeing unity?" 56% of likely California voters in March said they saw little chance of unity in America. So we have two surveys in January and March from the PPIC of California voters saying that a majority of them have little faith America will come back together or political differences will be accepted. How likely is it that America is going to come together and end the division that resulted in about 32% of Californians asking to leave America? Reuters, Ipsos, and Stanford University in February 2017, after Trump was elected, found that 32% of Californians wanted to break away immediately. They asked them, "Do you know what you're talking about?" And they said, yes. That is 1/3 of Californians said, "Let's go ahead and leave because we can't imagine being part of Donald Trump's America." Then we have surveys recently where 60% of the voters said they have little faith that America can be fixed and come together. How loyal is California to America when one election results in almost 1/3 of us saying that we would like to leave? And what does the future hold, given that around 60% of California voters this year said they had little faith that America can come together? Professor James Hannick.
Blimey! I'd like to say, in a predictive mode, that I think most big countries, and I think the United States is certainly one of the biggest, pretty much muddle through. There are all kinds of fights going on all the time, but we pretty much muddle through. And in key moments where there's a lot of controversy, I think you're likely to get a whole lot of people saying, "I'm done, I've had it." In fact, I don't think they are. I think we pretty much muddle through. Now, that said, I don't want to just muddle through. I'd like to see some major changes. I'd like to see a California in which the common good is what people focus on, rather than their own economic interests, rather than on their own sectional interests. I'd like to see a California that really looked different than it looks now. For example, as a starter, I'd like to see sanctuary cities in California that were cities where abortions were not allowed. That's what I'd like to see very much. I'd like to see also the sanctuary cities at the same time, in which refugees were left alone so that they could pursue a decent life. I'd like to see that. one of the things I worry about in the debate we're having today is when we have, supposing we do this new California, is it a California that's any better than the California we have now? Unless a lot of other things change, I doubt it.
Okay. Louis Marinelli, the question is to you. How, given that Californians were ready to leave, 1/3 of them in an election, and that 60% of Californians, according to recent polls, say they have little to absolutely no faith in American unity happening, how realistic is it to consider that Californians are loyal to America? Candidate Marinelli.
Well, I think it's kind of a comical question because California always likes to criticize Texas because Texas has a long history of basically trying to take their ball and go back home when they don't win a presidential election. They threaten to secede time and time again when a Democrat is elected president. And so what we saw in 2016 was kind of, I think, an important change in our country because California then said the same thing, but in that case, a Republican was elected. So I think that represents that the division in the country has grown to such an extent where it's not just those rednecks in Texas who are threatening to secede and put up their Confederate flag and so on and so forth, like they've been doing for decades. But now we have the liberal progressive people in California also saying that when the Republicans are elected, it doesn't represent their values. Maybe it's time for us to go our own way. And that's just a representative of the problem. That now it's happening on both sides of the political spectrum. Whereas for a long time, secession has been pretty much tied exclusively to the right. And now we have a situation where secession is not only a conservative Republican, but I'm a pretty progressive person. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not also not a Republican, but I have several different issues that I support that would be called progressive and liberal. I ran in 2016 for Assembly as a Bernie crack. But I also support things like the Second Amendment. So I'm a mixed bag there. And so I think it's important to represent the fact that the division of the country has gone to such a point where it's both sides are now considering the idea of secession.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Wade, I apologize. Professor James Hannick, Professor of Philosophy, I apologize. 1 minute response, sir.
My dad always said, I don't care what you say about me as long as you spell my name right.
I'm sorry. I
That's all right.
apologize, sir. I apologize.
That's easy. Give me an extra 10 seconds. I appreciate the difficulty with which my worthy opponent tries to set forth his position. And I think one of the difficulties is our political discourse is infested by what I call thought blockers. I'd like to hear a good long debate in which the words liberal, progressive, conservative, and reactionary were not used at all. I'd like to hear a debate in which we talked about the common good and the nature of the common good and how the common good includes everyone, from conception to death, from inside our borders to outside our borders. And I'd like to see a California that didn't have nuclear stockpiling supervised by its flagship university, the University of Berkeley. And until those things change in California, even though I'm sympathetic to decentralizing in a general way, until those things change, I don't know as if it would make much of a difference.
Candidate Marinelli, 1 minute response.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I'd like to break up my response into two parts. First, I'd like to ask the professor a question, whether, because I've just seen this in the news recently, if he supports the push for vaccination in California with like the vaccine cards and so on and so forth. Do you support like this mandatory vaccination or something like that?
Well, if you're asking me if I'm an anti-vaxxer, the answer is no. capital N, capital O. What I do raise questions about are vaccines that are based on the use of cells taken from freshly aborted babies. And
Okay.
the vaccine that we have in Israel doesn't do that. There's no reason to have that kind of vaccine. And I
Okay.
think there's much concern that we have it in California and the United States. We should.
Okay. So, I mean, the reason I was asking that question because you've mentioned on several occasions that you're representing, and you believe that what we should do is based upon the common good. Well,
Yes.
based on that philosophy of the common good, I mean, I think you would have to advocate for the use of mandatory vaccines because it would be for the common good, so to speak. It would be beneficial to the most number of people. Utilitarianism would be beneficial to the most number of people to say everybody get a vaccine. Some people may be injured. There may be aborted fetuses in the contents or whatever you want to say, but it's for the common good that everybody gets a vaccine. And I don't think that is something you can support.
No, thank you very much for making that point. The common good is not the good of the majority. The common good is not a utilitarian aggregate. The common good is the good of everyone. And we do not advance the common good if we sacrifice the lives of some for the supposed better life of the majority. I abhor utilitarianism. Think of utilitarians as beady-eyed bean counters. The common good is all-inclusive.
Well, I appreciate the idea, but I don't know if there's a way to, enact some kind of policy that benefits literally everybody, because you always have to pick sides. In any issue, you're going to make some people happy, you're going to disappoint other people, and you try to, as a leader, decide what's
Yes.
good. What's the common good for everybody, but not everybody, because it's not possible to please everybody.
If politics is based on satisfying everyone's preferences, politics is doomed. Of course, there are going to be disagreements. I want disagreements about matters of principle, not matters of special group interests or economic advantage or nationalism. I want the differences to be based on principles. And I don't mind being divisive if we're being divisive about core principles that bear on the dignity of the human person.
Okay. Thank you both. Next question. In February 2017, polls showed that around 65% of Californians, February 2017, were for ignoring federal law on immigration and climate change. Quotes, 65% of California adults say the state and local governments should pursue their own policies to protect the rights of undocumented immigrants, while 63% of adults support state action to address global climate warming. So in February 2017, we saw 65% of Californians say, let's do our own thing on these two major areas, regardless of whatever the federal government says. In April 2020, California Governor Newsom told the federal government that he would ignore their own guidance on coronavirus and issue the state's own guidance when it felt ready to do so. In May 2021, Joe Matthews, a policy reporter well respected in California, said that the American Supreme Court is so conservative and appears to have hatred for California that, quotes, as for the current justices, here's a warning. If you persist in open bias against our state, don't be surprised if citizens defy your rulings. In May 2021, when the CDC and the Biden administration issued guidance that people with vaccines need not wear a mask, California responded by saying they would develop their own guidelines when they felt like it and issue them on their own timescale. Even without a Calexit, do you support California ignoring federal law and directions as we have done at the person and governor level over the last few years? Professor James Hanning.
I think people need to have social unions. I think they need to have social unions at every level. We begin with the family, we go to the neighborhood, we go to the local community. And when necessary, we certainly go to the federal level. However, the reason why we need social unions is to bring about the common good. And as I just noted, the common good doesn't exclude anyone. But when the federal law, or when the law of the state of California, or when the law of Inglewood, some city statute, is in direct opposition to the common good, insofar as a law is itself requiring that a citizen act against God's law, then, well, that kind of law is no law at all. An unjust law, says Thomas, St. Thomas and St. Augustine, an unjust law is no law at all in a state or a nation or a country that works on such laws, in quotes. They're great bands of robbers.
Okay. Candidate Marinelli, same question to you, sir.
Can you repeat the question for me?
In February 2017, Californians showed a willingness to ignore federal regulations on climate change and undocumented immigration. If we fast forward to 2020 and 2021,
without the background information, just the actual question.
do you support Californians ignoring federal directions and laws as the people and the governors have done so recently, even if it doesn't result in a Calexit?
Yes, and I will do that on a daily basis as governor. We don't need, as Californians, to be following federal regulations and laws when the federal government doesn't follow its own laws or the federal constitution. I believe in leading by example, and as far as the American government's not going to follow its own rules, its own constitution, its own laws, then why should the people of California have to follow them when they're not? So yes, I support that decision by our leaders in California to ignore federal laws. I believe in nullifying federal laws. And as governor, I will actively be doing that and challenging the federal government in court, in nullifying federal laws, and outright just refusing to enforce federal laws in California, because those laws that are passed by the federal government are not passed under the principle of with equal representation and representation in Congress, because California is not fairly represented in Washington, and therefore they do not have the consent of the governed, in my opinion. And as long as the American government doesn't have the consent of the governed, as we've spoken before, a third of Californians are ready to leave the union. And if you account those who have to maybe still consider the issue, another 15% on top of that, it's almost half the population of California is either willing to secede or willing to consider the option. I don't think that the American government has the consent of the governed, and it'll be my job as governor of California to change courses and say the California Constitution is now the supreme law of the land, and that's going to be all detailed in our Declaration of Independence that I will issue and make a proclamation of California independence.
Thank you. Professor Hanik, response? Sorry, you are unmuted. Professor Hanik, 1 minute for a response, Professor.
The great majority of laws that people follow in their daily lives, perfectly legitimate laws, and we have an obligation to obey those laws. Without obeying those perfectly legitimate laws, we'd have a kind of collapse. So that said, I want to go on to say that if federal authorities don't follow federal laws, that's not an open invitation for us not to follow federal laws. What's really important is whether the federal laws are decent laws. If the federal laws are decent laws, that's fine. If the federal laws go against fundamental moral principles, then we ought not to follow them, regardless of whether the majority of people follow them. I can imagine an imaginary state in which there are 100 people, and 75% of the people vote in favor of oppressing 25% of the people. That's the majority rule. It's a bad rule. Bad rule. There's no moral magic in majority rule. There's a support for majority rule in that we need to have everybody participating in the political sphere. That's crucial, but it doesn't decide right and wrong.
Okay. This will be our last question. Fuji Shiro, we see you. We will be Fuji Inn for the next debate with candidate Marinelli in a few minutes. That will start at 2. Last question to both candidates. Recently, Joe Biden refused to hold China accountable for the genocide of Uyghur Muslims live on CNN television. He also refused to hold Saudi Arabia responsible for dismembering a journalist for reporting on them. He also upheld the trade war on China. He also said that he wanted to initially keep the caps on refugees designed by Donald Trump that were seen as a form of punishment against immigrants. He also told all of Latin America to not come to America, said that he wanted to continue the Trump policy of continuing the border wall construction, and has up to this month continued to keep kids in cages that has been so bad that the New York Times is calling the Biden administration out on that. Given that California reacted to these things in horror and disgust, children in cages, the border wall, not holding genocide, excusing dictators, punishing refugees, the trade war with China, and Joe Biden is continuing all of those policies. If Joe Biden's the decent version of America and backs up many acts that are against California values, how can California have faith in the federal government, given that it's being claimed that he is the decent version of America? Professor Henning.
I don't think that the president, I like to call him Mr. Biden, is the decent version of America. I think Mr. Biden is morally bankrupt on a wide range of issues. But so also is the leadership in the state of California. I think we ought to be sharply acting with regard to the way we trade with China. The way we trade with China. I think we've been vastly too diplomatic when it comes to that. So I don't think that Joe Biden is a decent version of America. I don't think the current governor of the state of California is a decent version of America. I don't think that any of his Republican opponents are decent versions of America. That's one of the reasons why I'm very much engaged in a party that really is based on the common good, that respects the dignity of each and every person, that understands that there has to be an interplay between subsidiarity and solidarity.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Marinelli, the question is to you.
Again, I think it's kind of funny that we're trying to decide what is the decent version of America. Because a lot of the reason that we're running this campaign to make California an independent country is because we think it's not a decent country. I mean, at least we're talking about in the international field, international arena. America is a country seen by most of the people around the world as an imperialist country, an occupying force, country that drops bombs from drones and kills families having picnics or weddings, a country that takes other countries' natural resources and leaves them with nothing. I don't think that's decent. And I think that, when you elect somebody like Donald Trump or you elect somebody like Joseph Biden, I don't think that there's much of a difference between the two of them besides their personality. Sure, maybe Joe Biden has a nicer personality, but their policies are very similar to each other, and they don't very much differ from each other when it comes to, governing the United States. A lot of the things that Donald Trump did as president continue to happen and occur today under the Biden administration. So if Donald Trump wasn't a decent version of America, I don't think that Joe Biden is the great improvement of that. I still see America continuing its foreign policies around the world. We still have, America's militaristic and imperialistic foreign agenda. And until that changes, I don't think that we're going to have a decent version of America. So to answer the question, whether or not California can, trust the government, this goes back to the idea that California is a different mentality. If California wasn't a part of the United States, we wouldn't be subsidizing the American military regime. We wouldn't be participating in America's military adventures overseas. And we would instead be using that money that we waste on the American military budget on building California, reducing our debt, reducing our taxes, and improving the quality of life of the people of California. That's what people of California believe in.
We're going to go to candidate Fuji Shiora here in about 5 minutes to start the second round of debate. In order to keep us on time, we're going to go now to closing statements. Closing statements, 2 minutes each candidate. That will end this round of debate. A 2-minute closing statement to Professor Hanik. You can comment on anything you've already commented on before. You can talk about your campaign or bring up totally new issues. We will keep the timeline to 2 minutes. Professor Hanik, closing statements. Professor.
First statement is a kind of formal statement. In general, I prefer what's decentralized to what's centralized. In general, I'm open to the possible coming to be as an independent country, the current state of California. In general, but none of that deals with substantive questions. The substantive questions are we directed towards the common good? Do we in fact hold every human life to be sacred? Do we in fact want to give general representation to as many people as possible? I don't see that if California here and now were to separate from the United States, it would be any real improvement. First questions I'd ask would be, well, will we acknowledge how many unborn babies we allow to be dismembered? Well, will we change our position on physician-assisted suicide? Well, will we disassociate ourselves from the tending by the folks at Cal State Berkeley of nuclear weapons arsenals? I doubt if there'd be any change in that. That's the sort of change we really need to get to. Perhaps decentralizing will help, perhaps. And I'm certainly in favor of looking to the decentralized position rather than the centralized position. But one of the things we'll certainly have to do is make political discourse more coherent. Cut it with the canned stuff.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Louis Marinelli, closing statement, 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, I'd like to take the time to talk about what would be different if California would become an independent country as this campaign advocates. First of all, what we're going to do is keep California's taxes in California. That means instead of subsidizing the other states in this union, and instead of subsidizing the bloated American military budget, we're going to be subsidizing the people of California. We're going to be paying for roads and hospitals and schools in California, reducing the cost of life in California and improving the quality of life in California. That's what our tax dollars should be used for. Instead of paying for wars overseas, we're going to be paying for schools and hospitals here at home domestically in California. In addition to that, what other kind of reforms can we put into place? California is an independent country, not chained down by the American Constitution. We could do a lot of different things. Now, that's not to say that the American Constitution needs to be completely ignored or forgotten and destroyed and never used again. We can take some good aspects of the American Constitution into the California Constitution, or keep the parts in there that we want to keep. But there will be a lot more opportunity for California to pursue the public policy preferences it wants as an independent country, as opposed to being held down by the American Constitution, the American judicial system, and everything that's connected to that. One of the things that I'd like to advance forward is proportional representation in the California legislature, whereby instead of having two-party system that was created by the Americans, by the way, we can have multi-party legislature in Sacramento that represents not just the Republicans and the Democrats, but also the Green Party, Peace and Freedom Party, maybe the American Solidarity Party, if there's enough people in there. So we want to have a multi-party platform and an ability for more than one or two parties to win an election in California. So proportional representation could happen under an independent California. We could also have a slew of other reforms, such as the state bank. We could put into a state bank. In fact, the state bank can be done now, but as an independent country, that's what we usually do. So there's a lot of different things that we can do as an independent country, and I'm out of time, but we will continue with the next debate.
Thank you both. I appreciate both candidates being here. I apologize for the technical issues. Professor Hanik, we're going to pull you from the stream. You don't have to leave. You can watch. We're going to move on to the next debate panel. Thank you, Professor. Fuji Shiora, can you hear me okay? Okay, let me unmute you. Can't. I've unmuted you, but you're muted on your end.
Hello.
Fuji, can you hear me okay, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Lewis, can you hear Fuji?
Yes, I can.
Fuji, can you hear Lewis?
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. Appreciate the fun with the logo. I'm going to do the exact same introduction. I'm going to do a commercial. We are live streaming now. We're going to do a commercial, and then I'll bring you right back in. I don't know, Fuji, are you there? Fuji? Okay. Fuji, Mr. Shura's screen has frozen. Fuji, are you there?
It's a good point for it to be frozen at, by the way. You should take a screenshot of it. This is, you know.
I mean, if you want, I could do a screenshot.
I think it'd be funny because it froze at a good spot for him. He's smiling, he's happy.
Okay, we got a screenshot.
Okay.
Mr. Shiora, are you there? Mr. Shiora?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
Good.
Lewis, can you hear Mr. Shiora?
Yeah, I think we can all hear each other.
Shiora, Mr. Shiora, can you hear Lewis?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I have to go through the motions. Okay, I'm going to go to commercial. We'll come out of commercial. I will walk you through the exact same format. Lewis, you're familiar with it. Mr. Shiora, it'll be an explanation for you, and we'll go from there. Not to hold it up any further, I'm going to go to commercial, and then I'll just explain what we're doing.
Good.
Welcome to the Yes California one-on-one special debates. Candidates who participated in the Yes California Recall Candidate Debate Series, as you may have seen in the news, have had the option to call out any other candidate and ask to debate them on any topic. Candidate Marinelli has asked multiple candidates if they would be willing to debate with him on the topic of California as a nation. We just got done with our first debate with Professor James Hannick, and now we'll have our second debate with candidate Marinelli versus Fuji Shiora. I'm going to introduce the debate. Then we're going to allow each candidate to do a 2-minute opening statement that they can do about the general topic or about their candidacy. And then we will go to a series of questions. Each candidate will have 1.5 to 2 minutes to answer each question. After each question, I will ask a candidate if they would like to comment on the other candidate's response. Okay.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. 1 second. I had to connect using my cell phone. And was that coincidence that my connection didn't work at the same time I connected to Yes California?
Well, we'll stop there. Thank you. Thank you.
But, you know, this is an important topic, and I just wonder, you know.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we're going to get started with the topic right now. I'm going to do a 2-minute introduction. I mean, each candidate will be allowed to do a 2-minute introduction. Trying to mute your mic, but it won't let me. Okay. In 2 minutes, each candidate will be allowed to introduce themselves and how they feel about the topic in general. We're going to go to candidate Marinelli first because last time we let the other candidate speak first. A 2-minute opening statement, candidate Lewis Marinelli.
Should I wait for Mr. Shiora to return?
That's your call. He's somehow lost the stream 3 times. I'll try to bring him in when he can. I would suggest you go ahead and start. There's Fuji now. Lewis Marinelli, 2-minute opening statement.
Sure. So whether or not California is more of a nation than a state, I think it's important to understand the terms that we're dealing with here. I think that there's a difference. So I don't think that there is. There is a difference between a nation and a state. I like to use the word country because that's clearly what we're trying to achieve is to make California a country. And we could accept the fact that because California has its own history, its own ethnicity, kind of, its own language, its own culture, its own state of mind, mentality, that it qualifies as a distinct society from the United States. And so that's kind of like a nation, because a nation is a group of people with a common geographic location that share a common history, common values, common language, etc. So I think that California qualifies as a nation now, a nation within a nation the United States, nation state. And so what we're trying to do is take that nation of California, which is distinct from the other parts of this country, distinct like Quebec in Canada, like Scotland in the UK, or Catalonia in Spain, and say we're going to become an independent country. And that's what I think that we're talking about here, is not whether or not California is a nation instead of a state, whether or not California should be a country instead of an American state. And that's what our campaign is about. Our campaign believes that California does act more like a country because it does have the 5th largest economy in the world. It does have a population of nearly 40 million people. It does have the natural resources to sustain itself and to be independent. And it does so many other things on the world stage that is more resemblance of the behavior of a country than a state. Things like its trading history, its trading activities are more like a country than a state. But I'm out of time, so I'll defer to Mr. Shiora.
Mr. Shiora, a 2-minute introductory statement about whatever you would like, or addressing the topic itself. Candidate Shiora.
Thank you. I'm calling on a Wi-Fi connection from my phone, so please bear with me. Thank you, Louis Martinelli. You bring up some very important topics. Many Californian voters I've talked to have shared your concern. And Marcus Reese Evans, thank you so much for hosting this for Yes California. There are California voters I've met with that share. This is a platform to really understand it, even debate it. In many ways. And how can California evolve into a nation state is a big question with many obstacles. And I think it's important that we have this candid, open discussion on it. And so here we go with this debate. I'm very happy to be. Show is representing so many concerns of California voters. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to our first question. 3 separate California governors, Schwarzenegger, then Brown, then Newsom, all said that California was a nation state. Were they wrong to do so? Louis Marinelli.
Well, I don't think that they're wrong to do so, because there's, in this country we have freedom of speech, and so of course they're able to say whatever they want to say. The question is whether or not what they're saying is accurate. And I think that, for example, when Jerry Brown said that California is a separate nation, he didn't mean that we were some kind of separate country, like I was talking about before, but that we were a separate nation and that we are a distinct society in California. And what he was specifically referring to, because he said it himself, was that California has a different mentality. He called it the California state of mind. And that state of mind in California is different from the rest of the country. The United States, for example, the American state of mind is different from the California state of mind. And so from that context, I think that, yes, California is a separate nation, a nation within a larger nation state. If you look at, for example, the population distribution of the American population, for example, you have most of it on the eastern side of the Mississippi River, and then you have this vast empty space of mountains and deserts. Yeah, some cities out there like Albuquerque, etc., but mostly open space, mountains and deserts. And then you have, on the other side of those mountains, you have this massive new population called California. It's a distinct society because it's isolated from the other part of the country. It's isolated from the other population. And when you have 2 different populations that are isolated from each other, separated by geographic barriers, for example, you inevitably have differences in language, history, culture, and that's what makes you a different nation. So California is a different nation. The question is whether or not we're going to be able to make that nation into a nation state, into a country, and that's what this campaign is about.
Candidate Sciorra, this question is to you. 3 separate California governors representing a period of over 15 years have all referred to California as a nation state. Were they inaccurate or wrong to say that?
No, they were not, because it is my understanding they said it in the context of insinuating that California and a bureaucratic so in that context, no. In the strict black letter of the law, obviously California is not a nation state, but in a proverbial sense that they were referring to it as a connotation to the powerhouse that California is economically, technologically, entertainment-wise, that they were correct. That California is a sovereign nation in many ways, not legally, not the black letter of the law, obviously, but it can and should be in some ways in their mindset. I believe that even though they didn't voice it, perhaps subconsciously they were voicing it.
Candidate Marinelli, a 1-minute rebuttal or response to candidate Fuji Sciorra.
Well, I think that, generally speaking, we're on the same page there, that we agree that none of the governors have called California an independent country. They have spoken to California's economic power as the 5th largest economy in the world. We have a population of 40 million. We have our own different mentality that's different from the American mentality. That's a different culture, from the American culture. California culture, for example. So all those things combined make California a separate nation. We're still a part of the United States country. And that's the problem. We want to get out of the United States country, remain the nation that we are, and become a nation state. And the 194th member state of the United Nations. So we're talking about here making California from a state in the American Union to a state with a capital S, meaning synonymous with country.
Candidate Sciorra, a 1-minute response or rebuttal, your choice to what candidate Marinelli said.
No response.
Okay. We're going to go to the next question. In February 2017, polls showed that around 65% of Californians were supportive of ignoring federal direction on climate change and immigration. Quote, 65% of California adults say the state and local governments should pursue their own policies to protect the rights of immigrants, while 63% of adults support state action to address global warming. In April of 2020, California Governor Newsom told the federal government that he would ignore their coronavirus regulations and California would develop its own guidance and do what it wanted to instead of federal regulations or guidance. In May 2021, Joe Matthews, a respected policy reporter who's covered California government for many years, said that the Supreme Court of America is now so conservative that it appears to outright direct hate towards California. Quotes, as for the current justices, here's a warning. If you persist in open bias against our state, don't be surprised if citizens defy your rulings. Quotes, that was Joe Matthews. Finally, in May 2021, when the Joe Biden administration from the federal government and the Centers for Disease Control, which influenced the world, issued guidance that people with vaccines don't need to wear a mask, the California government said that they would make up their own guidance and pursue it at their own schedule and not necessarily follow what the federal government or the CDC says. Even without a Cal exit, do you as a governor candidate support this sort of behavior where California citizens seem to prefer ignoring federal law and governors seem to say that on occasion? We'll switch it up a little bit and go with candidate Fuji Sciorra first, then candidate Marinelli. Fuji Sciorra.
Would I ignore certain Pacific federal law as stated with immigration and climate? Yes. climate, protecting our environment for food security is very important to me. Number two, I realize that federal law has been violated with sanctuary cities, but I am very grateful that families have remained united. We have a lot of undocumented mothers and fathers here with American-born children. And so it is essential and imperative that we remain united. Immigration just isn't so black and white. It is complicated. And so I'm grateful that we did ignore law by keeping families together. California is complex and it's diverse. But one thing we're pro-family in many ways, and I'm proud of that. And I'd just like to remind our listeners, the first Constitution was in English and in Spanish prior to California becoming part of the state, becoming a state and part of the Union, and back before. So it's really essential that I would ignore certain federal laws, not all, but certain federal laws to keep families united. And if it helps preserve our food security and protect the environment, I would ignore federal law in favor of protecting our environment. Thank you.
Candidate Marinelli, 2-minute response, same question, sir.
Well, I completely support the idea of our governors and leaders in California and the people of California themselves ignoring federal law. It's the basis of the fact that the federal government ignores federal law. As governor, I'm going to make sports out of ignoring federal law. And I'm going to do it on a daily basis. And I'm going to tell the people of California that we don't need to follow federal law in order to have a happy and productive society. And then when the people of California see that California can function without the federal laws, without federal agencies, without federal dollars, etc., then the people of California will lose their last connection, which is making them consider remaining part of the union. And so by setting that example, by leading by example, saying that no, federal law does not apply in California, follow my example, watch what they do, they won't do anything, then we will become an independent country because the people will understand that it's possible. And that's one of the things that we've run into in this campaign for California independence, that some people don't understand if it's possible. Well, anything is possible if you just do it. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to declare California an independent country. We are going to get the state legislature to affirm that. Or if they don't want to do that, we're going to tell them to go back home on their vacation and explain to their constituents why they don't deserve to have independence, why they should continue to bend the knee to Washington. I think that I wouldn't like that type of town hall meeting. And then once the state legislature approves that Declaration of Independence, we're going to put it before the voters. And when the voters then approve the referendum of independence, the United States will lose its legitimacy to govern California because it will have lost the consent of the governed. And that's all going to start from day one. When I, as the governor of California, say that California is on the path towards independence, and we are going to begin phasing out federal laws and federal jurisdiction from the state of California.
Thank you. Candidate Sciarra, a 1-minute response to anything you heard.
Chris,
You are unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I was just wondering, what other pathways would there be other than going through the state legislature for California independence?
So there we have two different ways that we're considering. The first way is, as I described, going from an executive action to declare independence, supported by the state legislature and supported by a referendum of the people. Another agenda or another path is through the Supreme Court ruling in Texas versus White, which said that states can secede from the union with the consent of the states. Did not say that we need the consent of Congress or presidential signature or a constitutional amendment. It said the consent of the states. So what we're going to do is simultaneously follow two tracks. We're going to start defying federal law, ignoring federal laws in California. But at the same time, we're going to go to the other states in this union. We need about 25 or 26 of them. And we're going to lobby for their support to say, hey, pass a resolution at the state legislature level, in the state assembly, the state senate of your state, that says this state of, for example, Idaho or Wyoming or Montana believes that the people of California, if they hold a referendum and support it at the ballot, should become an independent country if that's what they want. And once we have a collection of, say, 25 or 26 of these referendums, from even if we get them from the states that elected Donald Trump in 2016, then we have more than enough to have what constitutes the consent of the majority of the states. And that would give us the legitimacy on a national level to say that, okay, now we're going to have a referendum in California. We have the consent of the states. Now it's in our hands. Are we, as a society in California, going to vote yes or no on independence? And then we respect the will of the people.
Candidate Shura, a response to you. I'm sorry. I apologize. Candidate Shura, I unmuted you. Sorry.
I have met a lot of California voters who have asked me that question, like, what would I do if California became a country, or how could it become a country? And they said, I want to vote on it. And from my understanding, there is a significant number of Californians that want to vote for or not or against. And I think that's something that I take very seriously as an elected candidate to California governor. And also what's really important as an acting elected official in California, who am I to disqualify qualified Americans, Californian voters from a vote they feel is important? I feel that let the vote take place and let the voters decide. I think the most logical path for my understanding would just simply amend the California state constitution to allow California to become a sovereign republic. That's all. Thank you.
Candidate Marinelli, a 1-minute response, or we can move to the next question.
Well, I would just add to it. I don't have anything really to disagree with there. I would just add to it that, yes, the ultimate goal is to put this question before the voters. If the voters approve it, we move forward. If they reject it, we're not going to force it upon anybody. Well, let the people vote. That's what democracy is about. Let the people vote. Let's put the referendum before the voters. Let's see what the voters say. And then we'll move based on that decision from the collective. And I'd also say that we don't have to just amend the state constitution to do this. We can to say that California can compete in the union. Yes, there is a section of the state constitution that needs to be addressed where it says that California is a separate part of the United States, but we can amend it. There's other parts of the state constitution we can amend. Simple things like changing the title of the chief executive in California from governor to president. If we're going to be a Republican independent country, one thing that we could do, without even seceding, is change the name of the chief executive of California from governor to president. Imagine if we were, as a state in the union, California, state in the union, didn't secede from the union, didn't declare independence, but we had a president of California instead of a governor. And let's say that we had that for 20 years. And the next generation of Californians grew up only knowing that the leader of California was a president and the leader of every other state was just a governor. What kind of mentality are they going to have when they're 20 and 30 years old, growing up in a state that has a president instead of a governor? That's going to change the mindset in California, where everybody's going to know that California is different, and California is more than just a state. It is a nation state. And then we're going to move forward, hopefully much earlier than that, by the way. I mean, that's going to change the mindset. But if we want to spread this out over decades, we could do that. But we're going to move through my election much quicker than that.
Candidate Shura, a response.
I'm glad to hear that he believes in letting the voters decide. It's really simple. Either you're for or against, that's okay. As an elected official, I would not disqualify California voters from voting. Why would you? That's for other candidates to answer. But for myself and candidate Marinelli, clearly we're in agreement that voters exist to vote. It really is that simple. And to obstruct or deny, interfere, or oppress is very concerning. And I do feel that I have met so many California voters that are concerned about this very, very specific question on California independence. But it's a complex situation, and I don't believe we're going to explain everything within 30 or 50 minutes, how California could get there.
For clarification, I'm looking for a simple yes or no. It appears both candidates support the idea of modifying the Constitution of California to remove the section that says it's an indelible or inseparable part of America. Is that correct?
Yes.
Candidate Shearer?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Next question. In February 2017, 32% of Californians, according to Reuters and Stanford University, said they wanted to leave America immediately. They were not joking, they meant it. That's almost 15 million people, about 1/3 of California. 2 separate surveys asked the same questions and got the same results. Additionally, those surveys showed an additional 15.7% of Californians were not opposed to a discussion of secession. GQ magazine summed it up as saying the Reuters and Stanford University poll in February 2017 essentially showed that half of California was open to the topic of independence and 1/3 were ready to leave America immediately. Given that one election caused that sort of visceral reaction in California, how loyal to America are Californians? Candidate Marinelli.
Well, I think that this is a good representation of how divided the country has become and how much further it has divided itself over the years. Because if we go back and look at the response of, for example, the state of Texas, when Barack Obama was elected president, they were threatening to secede. And for years before that, the Texans were always, talking about secession and had pretty much a monopoly over the topic for the last several decades. And, it's been associated with Texas and the Confederate flag and the redneck culture and so on and so forth. But now we have in 2016, with the election of Trump, all of a sudden the people of California started talking about secession as well through CalExit. And California is certainly not Texas. California is a much more progressive society. So now what we see as a result, the point is that secession is no longer just an issue that's talked about amongst the conservative section of America. It's now being discussed here in California amongst liberals, progressives who want to have independence from a society that doesn't reflect their progressive values. And in Texas, they want to have independence from a society that doesn't reflect their conservative values. And so it doesn't seem like to me that America, as this abstract idea, is really doing much for anybody, because both in California and Texas and other states, by the way, there's a movement in Hawaii, there's a movement in Alaska, there's a movement up in New England. There, other states have their own secession movements as well. So I think it's just time for us to have a national divorce, to recognize the reality that this is a dysfunctional household. The United States is a dysfunctional household. It's time for California to move out. And that's what CalExit is about.
Candidate Shearer. And let me unmute you. You are unmuted. Candidate Shearer, same question.
Yes. For that to happen, I believe the audience and the voters deserve a more robust and detailed plan. And I think it's imperative that we keep this discussion going. Today, we're talking about it, but I think it merits another debate and more detailed education.
He's coming back. You're back.
Yeah, thank you. I was saying that this is a complicated topic that's near and dear to many California voters I met with, and it merits additional debates in particular segments: education, foreign policy, economy, environment. And I think it'd be incumbent on us as candidates to give them that detailed debate on how to best approach this.
Candidate Marinelli, a response, if you wish.
Well, I definitely think that we have a detailed plan on how to not only achieve California independence, but also what we're going to do with the independence to make California both a more affordable place to live with a better quality of life. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. To have an affordable place to live with a high quality of life is the best of both worlds. Right now, California is an extremely expensive place to live, and it lags, I think, in many respects to quality of life issues. So we're going to change that around by becoming an independent country, mostly because we're going to be able to keep California's taxes in California. That's more money in our treasury to spend on the people of California, on our infrastructure, on our healthcare, on our education programs, on a slew of other issues that we want in California or we want to spend money on, but we don't have the money for. And we don't have the money for it because we're subsidizing the other states in the union. Places like Arkansas, and Tennessee, and Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, the other states in the American South that we subsidize with our taxes, because we pay more in federal taxes every year than we receive back from the federal government in the form of federal spending and grants. So we're losing tens, sometimes hundreds of billions of dollars a year just in that respect. Last year, 2019, last year for which the numbers are available, 2019, California lost $160 billion that year alone in its trade deficit or its tax deficit with the United States. And so what would we have done in tax year 2020? Because it would have been the following year. If we had an extra $160 billion in the budget that year, we could have paid for universal education. We could have paid for universal health care. We could have paid for both of them. And so there's so many things that we can do in California to improve the lives of Californians and improve the quality of life and reduce the cost of living if we simply keep California's taxes in California. And we have a plan to do that, and that plan is independence.
Candidate Shira. 1 minute comment?
Yeah, those are interesting, proposals. But once again, I met California voters. Boy, they're asking me for a lot of details, and it's hard to argue that the California voters who I met with, who are requesting California independence, want to know if it would really benefit their retirement, their pensions, and so forth, and foreign affairs, how it relates. So this is getting complicated, and this is an important topic. But once again, this is a series of debates that I think will be essential to keeping this discussion going.
Well,
Thank you.
If I can just continue on that point, you mentioned things to do with Social Security and retirement and so on and so forth. Well, if you're an American citizen, because you're living in California and you're an American citizen, and then California becomes, let's say, theoretically speaking, California becomes an independent country, you don't lose your American citizenship. And so you'd still be eligible to receive your Social Security when you retire. Just like, for example, if you're an American and when you're 55 or 60, you said, oh, I'm going to go live in Ecuador, or I'm going to go live in Portugal to retire because the cost of living there is cheaper. A lot of people do that. A lot of Americans go live overseas when they retire. They're still eligible to collect their Social Security benefits when they're over there. So the idea that California is an independent country means that you lose American citizenship is wrong. The idea that California independence means that you lose eligibility for certain benefits that you paid for with your taxes throughout your whole life is wrong. So I would tell the voters of California who are asking me for details, I would at least tell them the fact that California as an independent country does not take away their American citizenship or any of the benefits that come with it.
Okay, 1 second. I'm going to build off what I think both candidates are saying, and I'm going to create a new question for both candidates, and I'm looking for your response. We'll go to candidate Shura first. In 2008, sorry, we get some messages. In 2008, Scotland, which has pursued devolution and had 2 votes on independence peacefully and legally, actually started their journey with what they call the Coleman Commission. It was a study by the government of Scotland that ordered their government to study what would happen if Scotland seceded. Didn't say they should do it, didn't say they should be against it. They just ordered their government to do an official investigative study on how to think about this. Given that both of you are saying there are many issues to look at California independence, would you, as governor, support a Scottish-style Coleman Commission for California to explore these issues as they did? Candidate Fuji Shura and then candidate Marinelli.
I will always support initiatives to keep voters engaged. Yes.
You are unmuted, but I can't hear you. I think you're muted on your end.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
I can hear you.
You can hear me.
Yep.
Nope.
Yes. No.
Oh, you can hear him. I'm sorry. Yes, we can hear you. I apologize.
Okay.
Fuji Shura.
That's
Yes.
okay. I would
Sorry.
always support initiatives that keep voters engaged and in part of the election process to be well informed of all sides. Yes.
Candidate Marinelli.
Well, we've been working on getting a devolution panel ballot to 2015. And the reason is because we do want to make an educated decision. And we want the voters to be educated and know what they're voting for or against. And we also want the leaders of California, when they're going to take on this great new responsibility, to understand what they're getting into. And so, yes, I think that it's necessary, absolutely necessary, for California to have a plan in place, or at least some kind of understanding of what California as an independent country will look like and how it can operate, so that when push comes to shove, I mean, I think I'll be doing the pushing and the shoving, to be honest, but when it comes to that point, when California becomes an independent country, we're going to know what to do. So yes, I totally will support the idea of putting forward a panel, an independent panel, not one made up of me and my colleagues, an independent panel of people who will research the issue and come up with a fair and reasonable response as to how that will look like, what will work, what will look like, and how it will work if California becomes an independent country. And we can use the results of that panel to chart the next steps going forward.
Thank you. Here's our next question. November 2016. Sorry, one second. In 2016, after the election of Donald Trump, when a majority of the American Electoral College voted for Trump, Kevin De Leon was the third highest ranking member of the California government. He said this, quote, "We woke up feeling like strangers in a foreign land, because yesterday Americans expressed their views on a pluralistic and democratic society that are clearly inconsistent with the values of California." That was the third highest ranking Californian said that. In January 2021, the Public Policy Institute, the think tank of the California government, asked California likely voters, do you think that America will continue to stay divided? 59% of voters in January 2021 said they believe America will continue to stay divided. In March 2021, the PPIC asked those same voters, are you pessimistic or optimistic that people of different political persuasions can come together? 56% of California voters were pessimistic that political divisions could be overseen. Given that we had the third highest ranking Californian government refer to America as a foreign land, and that California voters in January and March, a majority of them, almost 60%, said they had no faith in America coming back together or providing unity, is there reason for Californians to have faith in the American system, or are we seeing an imminent future of division? Candidate Shura.
You know, I will tell you and be honest with you. I've met Democrats who despise Trump, and I met Republicans who despise Biden. It's very divisive, very vitriol, unfortunately. But what's interesting is I would meet Democrats and Republicans, and when they would talk about California becoming a country, they agreed on that. So that was really fascinating. They hate Trump, but they hate Biden. But yet when it comes to California being a country, they had so many ideas and agreement. So that was really interesting. Will there be healing in 2022 and 2024? Will it get worse in 2022 in the election year? Time will tell. But California being a country, interestingly, I met Republicans and Democrats, Libertarians, Green Party voters that were in very unique, friendly unison in California becoming a country. Thank you.
Candidate Marinelli.
Yeah, I don't think that we are going to be able to restore relations between Americans in our country back to any kind of sense of tranquility, as is discussed in our funding documents. I think that we've reached a point of no return where things are going to continue to get worse before they get any better. That's why I think that California needs to jettison itself from that mess before we, you know what hits the fan. And I think that that's why it's important to have that devolution panel so we can have a plan B in place, ready to go when the you know what hits the fan, because I think that's coming. And I think that we need to avoid that, at least in terms of ourselves, look out for ourselves in California and get off that sinking ship. We've been using the analogy of the sinking ship for years because it's quite frankly the best analogy we can think of. The United States is a sinking ship, and perhaps California needs to get on a lifeboat before it's too late. So yes, I think that we don't have an opportunity to return immunity to America, and that's my position.
Candidate Shiora, a 1-minute response. You are unmuted now.
Thank you. I tell you, when I'm in downtown LA, wow, you know, the fanatical anti-Trump feeling is strong. When I'm in Texas, the anti-Biden is just out of control. So it's on both sides. It's not just a Democrat-Republican issue, by no means. The hatred is 50-50. I see it on both sides. I'm independent. I've always been independent, so I believe I have a very objective opinion on this matter. So I believe in nonviolence. I believe in voter participation. But all things being considered, I do believe, as somebody born in the city of San Diego, as a native Californian, that Californians have to vote on the destiny of California as Californians. And then second, as whatever political party preference you may choose. Thank you.
Next question, and then we will go to closing statements. Many Californians were disgusted with the administration and the policy choices of Trump. However, they were told that Joe Biden represented a return to decency in America and was the total opposite of Donald Trump. In fact, the campaign slogan for Joe Biden was that he represented the true soul of America. The question for both candidates is this: if Joe Biden represents the decent America and the opposite of what Donald Trump did, a series of policy stances that were anathema to everything we care about here in California, please explain your stance on this. Recently, Joe Biden refused to hold China accountable for genocide. He said that live on television. He also said he would not be holding the Saudi prince responsible for the murder and dismemberment in a grotesque medieval fashion of a reporter for reporting the news. He also upheld the trade war disastrously on China. He also upheld the Trump caps on refugees that were designed by Trump to discourage refugees and immigration to America. He also told Latin America not to come to America, just like Donald Trump. Additionally, he has continued Donald Trump's policies on expanding the wall, keeping children in cages, blocking those children from access to reporters or medical facilities, and in concentrated conditions, as criticized by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Given that Donald Trump did these things and they were disgusting to Californians, what does it mean that Joe Biden is doing the same things now? Candidate Shiora.
On the foreign policy issues, I find very little difference, unfortunately, with President Biden or President Trump regarding foreign policies on major issues like China and the Uyghurs, and specifically in the Middle East, a critical area right now going through turmoil. I personally believe, and I did this back in 2016, 2018, I've always wanted to have embassies. I think diplomatic communication, unrestricted diplomatic communication is essential to peace. I want there to be a full diplomatic access to Israel, likewise a full embassy for Palestine, for the state of Palestine. And I believe we had to treat them as equals so we could have a peaceful relation in the Middle East and safety and security and prosperity for Israel and Palestine, the state of Palestine and the state of Israel. But neither the Trump administration or Biden has been willing to open up an embassy for the state of Palestine, which I think is harmful for our reputation internationally, harmful for international law, and harmful for global recognition of what's going on in the Middle East.
Candidate Marinelli.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Recently, Joe Biden was elected to office. He's been told or said that he is the decent version of America, the total distinct opposite of Donald Trump. He has continued many Trump
without the background information.
Joe Biden's very similar to Donald Trump. What say you?
Oh, well, I didn't. That's why I was asking about what the question was, because I didn't know that was something that we didn't already understand. That when you have one president following the next president, and as the history of the United States in modern times has shown, that nothing really changes from one president to the next. So that's where my confusion comes from, because I thought everybody already knew that, and so we wouldn't have to discuss it. But yeah, sure. When you elect one president and then the next one promises change, and then it doesn't come, the next candidate promises change and it doesn't come. I mean, that was literally the campaign slogan of Barack Obama, right? It was change you can believe in. I don't think that much really changed in America as a result of Barack Obama. And then Donald Trump comes in trying to be the opposite of that. And again, not really much changed in America. Now we have Joe Biden who's come in and trying to restore America back to some kind of previous state of decency. Don't think that's really happening, because everything's continuing as it was before Donald Trump, as it was before Barack Obama. So that's just what America is. I mean, so this idea that America is some decent country, or was at some point in time a decent country, maybe it was at some point in time a decent country, but I'm sure you can find somebody or some group of people that say that no matter what part of American history you look at, there's vast amounts of indecency, whether you're talking about slavery up until 1860s, whether you're talking about the fact that women didn't have the right to vote until 1919. I mean, at what point of American history do you have a decent treatment of your own people? That's not even talking about the decent treatment of people around the world, because the United States has been around for about 245 years, and most of its history it's been at war, attacking other countries, killing civilians in other countries, imperialism taking their resources. So, I mean, sure, you can probably cherry pick a couple of examples of good things America has done. I'm not going to say that America's never done anything good and decent in its history, but I think it is heavily outweighed by the indecent things it has done throughout its history. So when you do that comparison, what side of the scale is heavier, decent or indecent? I think you have a more indecent country than decent one. So yes, Joe Biden is going to claim to be a more decent version of America, but his version of America is very similar to what it was under Donald Trump. So I don't see much of a difference there. Which, by the way, is why we want to secede from that country, because we have a different set of values here in California that are decent. If you talk to most Californians and you speak to the California state of mind, it's a decent state of mind that wants to protect equality and protect minorities and serve the public good and get out of wars. I mean, those are decent values.
1 minute response to candidate Shiora, or we can go to the next question. I'm
my
sorry.
fellow.
Fine, too.
Thank you. I do believe and know and feel with all my heart that the majority of America and Americans and our history is for the better, made the world a better place. Our Bill of Rights, our Constitution. And we made mistakes, but not perfect. And you know, a great reporter once told me no person could be 99% wrong all the time or 99% right all the time. And our elected leaders are not perfect. But I truly believe that the vast majority of Americans and our history has done so much good for the world. And yes, we need improvement. We're growing. We're still a new country compared to global history of mankind. And yet, I do see that America is a beacon of hope and liberty. And yes, I do believe ultimately that America will still remain a great and powerful, prosperous country if California became a nation state, or Texas for that matter. And that our diversity is what makes us great, but our diversity is also what makes it difficult, a challenge, and arguments will ensue. And I do believe that we are a great country because of diversity, and we have done so much and will continue to do so much for the world. Thank you.
1 minute response, candidate Marinelli.
Yeah, I would just like to point out, why are we doing this campaign for California to become an independent country? It's not just some philosophical discussion about, let's just become our own country, or, we don't like who was elected president, and this and that, so on and so forth. This is about quality of life. This is about cost of living. By becoming an independent country, California will increase the quality of life in California. It will decrease the cost of living in California. That's what we want to do. That's our objective here. Through independence, we can do that because we'll keep California's taxes in California. Through independence, we'll stop subsidizing the other states in this union at our expense. Case in point, when we don't have enough money to pay for our own public services because our taxes go to other states in this union, what does Sacramento do? Well, they have to make ends meet, so they raise your taxes. They create new fees to make up for the difference in taxes that are lost to subsidizing the other states. So without us subsidizing the other states, we no longer have a need to increase taxes and fees to make up that difference. Now, without subsidizing the American military budget at $90 billion a year, when the average country around the world spends $25 billion a year on their defense, we free up an additional $60-70 billion every year to go into our budget to pay for things that Californians actually care about, like education and healthcare, infrastructure development, doing something about the homeless, doing something about poverty. Those are things that we can pay for and do in California as an independent country because we're simply keeping California's taxes in California. It's really a simple idea, and it achieves so many great things. That's what this campaign is about. It's about achieving great things by doing simple acts of independence.
We're going to go to our a response from candidate Shiora.
Yeah, I have to say, as an elected official, the quality of life, healthcare, and education would astronomically expand in quality and quantity if California was a sovereign nation. Now, the big difficult question is, how would you deal with other states that are jealous? Let's be honest. California geographically got the mountains, the sea, the redwoods, a blessed diversity of racial mix, Silicon Valley, Hollywood. How are you going to contend with the jealous states? I mean, how?
Interesting. We're going to go to the next question, simply because we have only a few more minutes before Professor Frank Wade comes at 3 to start a debate with candidate Marinelli on economics and accounting. But the question we want to ask both candidates right now, this question will go to candidate Shiora first. Supposing that tomorrow California had a vote for independence and it passed the threshold recognized by the world as a legitimate vote, what would you do the first 2 weeks upon hearing of this news as governor of 40 million people, candidate Shiora?
Oh, wait, you said the first 2 weeks?
I'm sorry. Let's go with the first 100 days. I apologize. It's 110 here in Fresno. Sorry.
that is a valid question. But
First
for me
100
to first 100 days, and I want that to be, I want a chance to answer that in the next debate because I want to give a proper, correct, detailed answers to that important question. Merely saying it now in less than a minute, I don't believe would be fair to all the voters who I talk to who are really concerned about that question about California independence. I would like to come back on another debate and in 100 days give 100 answers to that.
Okay. Okay, candidate Marinelli. If a vote was held and a majority of California voters said that they wanted to become independent, what would you do in the first 100 days?
I would respect the will of the people of California, and I would issue a Declaration of Independence from the United States of America. I would then immediately begin a process of applying for membership in the United Nations, so that California would be internationally recognized on the world stage as a member of the United Nations. I would send a request to the state legislature to immediately begin to fund California State Military Reserve and to becoming a new sort of national guard for the state of California to protect itself, because the national guard that exists today is an element of the United States military apparatus, and California has its own military apparatus exclusively under the authority of the governor, called the California State Military Reserve. And I think that we would need to begin funding that at new levels, unprecedented levels, so that we would have a truly independent military apparatus in California under the command of the Commander-in-Chief of California. And I think that would be a good start for the first 100 days, joining the United Nations, getting our feet going in terms of national defense, and making that actual Declaration of Independence. Because after we make that Declaration of Independence, we're of course going to have to negotiate some kind of exit deal with the Americans. As you saw with Brexit, that went on for years. So we're of course would have to, at least my goal as governor in the first 100 days would be to do something much more rapid than that, by working out all those details that I think Mr. Scheuer is wondering about. We want to work out all the details and create an exit deal for the people of California.
Professor Frank Henry Wade is here. Professor, we will bring you in a few minutes. You will be called on in a few minutes. Candidate Fujishira, a 1-minute response to what candidate Marinelli just said. Let me unmute you. I apologize.
That is absolutely that's amazing, and I'm very grateful for Marinelli's explanation. And I think it deserves another debate on more details. I would like to know more and ask more and share more. Once again, maybe we turn all the counties into states. Also, turn our consulates in Los Angeles and San Francisco into full embassies. Also, we reciprocate sending our ambassadors right away to those foreign countries that have became embassies here. And also set up a very binational relationship with Mexico as soon as possible to commit trade agreements as soon as possible. And also to stabilize global peace, I would create a cryptocurrency called the Panda Bear between California and China to make sure the world is de-escalated and we're here to have peace and prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Shira. I'm going to pull you to the back of the studio. You don't have to leave, but I'm going to remove you from the stream. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Louis. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.
Okay. I need 2 minutes to get ready, but let's do a sound check first. Professor Wade, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Excellent. Very good.
Louis, can you hear Professor Wade?
Yes, I can hear everybody.
Professor Wade, can you hear Louis?
Yes.
All right, give me one. I need about 2 minutes.
My Marcus, I'll be listening in the background. When you come back, I'll come back myself. All right, I'll be back in a minute.
Yeah, I just need about 2 minutes, and we'll.
Okay, I'll be listening. When I hear you start talking again, I'll be back.
Got it.
Um,
Just a few minutes, Professor Wade. I need to get everything prepped.
okay.
Okay, 1 second. I'm loading up the questions into the banners so that everyone can see, just so that it's a nice, easy show. We'll get started in about 1 minute here. I'm almost ready.
Fine.
Okay. Professor Wade, are you from South Africa?
No, I was born and raised in San Francisco. I just spent a lot of time overseas, and I basically spent 20 years in South Africa or Southern Africa, Lesotho, Mozambique, working in South Africa itself. And my wife is South African, and I own a couple of businesses in South Africa. It's a wonderful country.
Very good, very good. Okay, Lewis, we are ready. Oops. Lewis, if you would come on back to the stage, please. Okay, I'm here. I'm here. Okay. All right. So everyone's here. Everyone can hear each other. Professor Wade,
Right.
Candidate Marinelli, I'm going to do a commercial. When the commercial ends, I will launch the debate. I will explain to you both what's going to happen and the format, and then we will start with questions. Okay. I'm going to start the commercial. When we come out of commercial, I'll start talking, and we'll go from there. And I will walk you through everything that's going to happen. Hello, this is the Yes California special one-on-one debate series. We've been hosting debates amongst half of the declared candidates in the California gubernatorial recall election scheduled in the next few months, most likely August. We've allowed each candidate to additionally ask any other candidate who's participated in the Yes California debates to debate one-on-one on any issue that they want. This opportunity has been made available to all candidates. Candidate Louis Marinelli has asked a few people, including Professor Wade, who has a professorship of accounting, to debate candidate Marinelli on the topic of Is California more like a nation than just a state? We're going to allow each candidate to have a 2-minute opening statement into their candidacy or addressing the general question of, is California more like a nation than a state? We will then go to a series of detailed, specific questions talking about the California budget, the federal budget, the interface between the California budget and the state budget, and other economic factors that are at play when talking about California and its relationship to another 49 states. So the first question is, is California more like a nation than a state? We're going to do a 2-minute introductory statement. We will go to Professor Wade first. Professor, you can address the question, not address the question, or do a general introduction to your candidacy, whatever you would like. Professor Frank Henry Wade.
Okay, thank you. Well, first, I'd like to tell you or talk about my background, which relates to my opinion about the subject. Basically, my background is I'm a doctor of business administration from Golden Gate University, and I'm also, I don't know if I mentioned it before, I'm also getting my second doctorate in organizational leadership from the University of Phoenix. I haven't been able to work on that one since the COVID-19 crisis, and my loss of my visa in Bangladesh has caused me to come back. But basically, I have a DBA in business administration, and of course a master's from West Virginia University and a bachelor's from Cal State University of Hayward, which is now East Bay. And I'm a CPA. I also have all the other accounting certifications, CIA, Certified General Auditor, Certified Management Accountant. You could say I'm the most qualified accountant there is. I haven't met anyone who's alive that has more accounting qualifications than I do. So in addition to this, I have worked 40 years running different business operations or companies in some management capacity. This is why I feel I could be a good governor, because of my management skills and the ability to deal with people. In addition to the 40 years of professional management experience, I've been teaching internationally for 10 years, usually in a Muslim country, where I feel it is my duty to try to combat jihadism, extremism, by presenting myself as an American in these Muslim
Thank you, Professor.
countries. I've taught in.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
I'm sorry that we're, just to be fair, that's 2 minutes. Louis Marinelli, an
Sure.
introductory statement for
Sure.
2 minutes. Louis
Yes,
Marinelli.
my name is Louis Marinelli. I'm quite the opposite of the professor, because I am very bad at math, so I won't challenge him in any math equations or anything like that in this debate. I'm sure he'll mop the floor with me in that regard. But I am a political activist in California. I have been advocating for California independence for the last 5 or 6 years now. I'm co-founder of the California Independence Movement. It's known around the world as CalExit. I'm the first president of Yes California, the first chairman of the California National Party, and the first candidate who's ever run in California for any office on the platform of California independence. That's not this election, of course. I'm referring to 2016, when I ran for state assembly as a candidate on the platform of California secession. And now I am the first candidate who will be on the ballot in California for governor, running on a platform of California independence, with the promise of declaring California independence during my first term as governor. I am also the founder and opener and the managing guest director of the California Embassy and Culture Center in Moscow, Russia. It's where I currently am today. I've been living in Moscow, Russia for a couple of years. My family is here. I have a daughter here. We're waiting for immigration documents for my family to be able to come back to the United States. Of course, my daughter was recently, in fact, I can actually break news and say that my daughter was recently given American citizenship by the American Embassy here in Moscow just a couple of days ago. So we're waiting for her passport to be received. We're waiting for other documents from my wife to be completed by the American Embassy so that everybody can come back to California. We can govern California and make it an independent country.
Thank you. We're going to go to our first question now. We'll ask both candidates to respond to this question after a brief statement on it. Since the 1980s, California has been a donor state, meaning that it sends more in federal taxes than it receives in total federal spending. That's across the board, everything included. California loses money, and it's done so since the 1980s, or about 4 decades. When we look at this on average, it's about 75 cents on the dollar that California gets returned back to it, meaning it loses about a quarter for every dollar federal income taxes pays on average over the last 40 years. Other states, around 20 to 35 states in America, make $1.50 to $3 for every federal income tax dollar they make, meaning they get paid 100 to 300% more than they actually donated. Under Senate Bill 1, the gas tax in California increased to 12 cents per gallon on November 2017. It also jumped an additional 5.6 cents a gallon on July 2019, and an additional 3.2 cents in July also in 2021. California has had to raise the gas tax in order to pay for rebuilding infrastructure, roads, to the tune of about $13 to $20 billion. However, that same amount of money is how much California loses on average in 1 year. Is it fair that California subsidizes so much of America that it has to raise taxes on itself to pay for basic needs? Professor Wade.
Yes. Well, first I'd like to talk about my book. I've written a book which I hope it would be a bestseller. The title is Hamilton Was Correct, the U.S. Dollar Will Remain Supreme, and Warning the Coming Crash of Gold. Now, I don't want to go into the book except one very important point that I make in this book, and that is that the U.S. dollar will always be supreme. Since Bretton Woods conference in 1954, when the U.S. dollar replaced the pound sterling, the U.S. dollar was made supreme because we had more gold in Fort Knox than the British had in their system. Then Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971, and we have a fiat currency. Now, there is physically no way the U.S. dollar can be removed as a major currency in the world. It is impossible to remove the dollar from the major currency of the world. People have tried. Gaddafi had the conferences in order to make the gold dinar the major currency in the world. He said that oil could not be purchased by America unless America issued gold dinar, and look what happened to Gaddafi. Saddam Hussein's major mistake was saying that his oil from Iraq had to be purchased with euro dollars, and look what happened to Saddam Hussein. Okay, now, given the U.S. dollar will remain supreme, I have stated that the U.S. national debt can go on into infinity. No one will supplant the dollar, and no one will make us forced to pay off the national debt.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry,
Sure.
that's the time. Question goes to candidate Marinelli. Given that California is a donor state and loses money on federal income tax for decades, is that fair, given that it means we have to raise taxes on ourselves for basic needs? Candidate Marinelli.
Well, the premise of the idea is generally right. There are some years where California gets more funding from the federal government than it pays, but generally speaking, the trend over the last several decades has been that Californians have paid more to the federal system than it has received back in the form of grants and loans and federal spending of other types. And so, yes, we are a donor state, generally speaking. The last year for which numbers are available, if you look at the IRS Statistics of Information data book, as well as usaspending.gov, you can compare the amount of taxes collected from California to the amount of federal spending, awarded to California. And in 2019, that deficit was $160 billion that California lost to the federal tax apparatus in just that 1 year alone. And that's been happening for decades. Yes, there's been some exceptions during times of recession. For example, when California may have received more dollars per se than it paid in dollars, but generally the idea is that California loses money every year. The last year for which that information is available is 2019, and that year we lost $160 billion. So the question that I ask the people of California is, what would we have done in fiscal year 2020 had we an extra $160 billion that year? I know things we wouldn't have had to do was we wouldn't have had to rack up more debt. We could have lowered the taxes. We could have paid for social services and other public services. We could have built better infrastructure, repaired infrastructure, built more water infrastructure to bring water to the Central Valley. We could have paid for education funding, healthcare funding. We could have had universal college education in California, which the price tag is about $5 billion a year. So there's so many different things that we can do in California if we simply keep California's taxes in California. That's unfortunately not the case. We're subsidizing the other states in this union. By the way, last time, most of the states that were subsidizing this union, red state America, they hate California values, think California is crazy. Why are we sending money to them? They're literally planning to have to feed them because the California feeds this country. And I think it's time for us to go our own way because we're being unappreciated by the American population.
Professor Wade, your response, a 1 minute response to any,
Well,
do you disagree, agree?
Yes.
Whatever you feel.
No, I disagree with the premise of California becoming an independent nation. Now, I have to apologize for talking about my book, but I wanted to make the point that the U.S. dollar will remain supreme. It cannot be replaced by anything, not a Bitcoin, not a euro, not a real. It will remain supreme. Now, we go back to the Constitutional Convention of 1787. The states, California was not a state then, but the other states gave the federal government the right to issue money. Now, according to people like Mark Levin, who I listen to a lot, he wants the states to revisit the Constitutional Convention and to give more power to the states. Well, in principle, I kind of agree with this, but what I want is the super gigantic state of California to take back some of the power. And the one power that I want us to take is the power to print money, which means the power to transfer our debt to make it part of the national debt of the United States. So we can spend all the money we want to. If we don't balance the budget, the imbalance amount becomes part of the national debt, which is held by the Federal Reserve Bank. This would solve all of our problems here in California. I don't advocate the other states to have the same right to transfer their imbalances to the Federal Reserve Bank, but I say California should. And in this way, we would get all of the money imbalance back to the people of California. And you have to look historically, California has made America great. America has made California great. A lot of people don't realize that. I also talk about the gold in my book, but I don't want to go into that. But to make a long story short about what happened after California became a state. After California became a state, Abraham Lincoln knew that he had the money now to correct slavery. And the Civil War was financed by the gold of California. So there is
Thank you,
basically
Professor.
no way that California can be extracted. Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Candidate Marinelli, you have 1 minute to respond if you want, or we can go to the next question. Your choice.
Well, I would just point out, I think that the professor has kept bringing up the issue of the dollar, but California independence doesn't mean that we're going to stop using the dollar or that some kind of California currency would replace the dollar. There are many places around the world that use the American dollar as legal tender. I know that the professor spent some time in South Africa, so you should be aware of the fact that that's legal tender in Zimbabwe. It's also legal tender in Ecuador, in Guam. Those are U.S. territories, but in Ecuador is an independent country. There's a number of other states such as Panama and Palau where the U.S. dollar is legal tender. And so independent California would continue to use the U.S. dollar. It would be legal tender in California, just as it is today. So independence of California doesn't have a kind of a threat or make a threat towards the dominance of the U.S. dollar, even though we're living in a world right now where China and Russia are de-investing from the dollar. It's still, California independence is not going to impact that U.S. dollar dominance in the global economy.
Professor Wade, a 1 minute rebuttal, or we can move to the next question.
Right. Well, just to zero in on my statement, I don't propose that we start printing money with the state of California on it. What I state is the act of printing money means that the federal government controls the printing of money, and if the federal government does not have a balanced budget, it issues the national debt. So I say, let California's debt or imbalance from the budget to the taxes, any imbalance should be borne by the federal government as part of the national debt. So in effect, we have retrieved the ability of printing money in theory. This means that our debt becomes part of the national debt, and we can spend on anything we need without having to stop because we have to balance the budget. And I've looked at this for many years, and I just want California to have that ability because we are a superior, powerful state in the United States. And that would be the only change that I want to make in California to make our life much better here. And also, I understand. Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I'll continue later.
Candidate Marinelli, you can have a 1 minute response to that, or we can go to the next part. Your call.
No, I think we're ready for the next question. I'm ready at least.
Okay. Next question. In 2009, Professor Lowenthal, a professor of international relations at the University of Southern California and president of the Pacific Council on International Policy, published the book Global California, where he said that California is in fact held back by the federal government in waiting for approval of trade deals. Basically, Professor Lowenthal, who worked out of the University of California at Long Beach, the preeminent university for international trade, and is also a scholar at USC on international trade, said that California is much more globally connected than America. And so when we go and sign trade deals, we have to then go back to the federal government and get approval. It typically takes 5 to 10 years to get any trade deal that California has approved by the federal government. Governor Schwarzenegger in 2010 literally pointed this out. He traveled to Asia with 100 California companies, signed multiple trade deals, and then criticized Democratic President Obama and Republican W. Bush for holding up those trade deals each for 5 years. The question to the candidates is, when you are the world's 5th largest economy and massively dependent on trade, is it a good idea that there's a separate layer of bureaucracy that holds up deals costing billions of dollars to the California economy. Professor Wade.
Well, yes, I've heard about this situation. What I would like to see is more cooperation with the federal government and California, that we can take the lead in these trade agreements, but we should have a member of our group with the federal government. Just as an analogy, I worked for the Franchise Tax Board for several years, and when we made when we came down on a deadbeat taxpayer in California, the Franchise Tax Board did all the heavy lifting, but we had to have a member of the IRS to be in with our group when we broke the door down and took their assets. So I believe that the expertise of California and the aggressiveness of California should be should not be held back, but we have to keep a contact with the federal government. And I believe that Arnold acted too independently. He should have demanded or tried to cooperate with the federal government in making these trade deals. But they were very good trade deals, and I would seek to have more cooperation with the federal government, but give us the lead to make these trade deals.
The question is to candidate Marinelli.
Well, I think, first of all, I'm just kind of smiling over here because I think a lot of people in California, if have ever had their assets seized by the IRS or the state of California, won't be voting for Mr. Wade, I think, in this election. Now that you've divulged that you're part of the team that's broken down their doors and taken their assets without paying their taxes. But I'm just joking to some extent. But back to the question, I think that California is highly dependent on international trade. We are also the number one location of foreign investment in the United States. And so that's what makes California a different place in respect to the other states in the union. And I think that as a result, we don't need to. It's not only that we shouldn't have to, but we don't need to because we are already self-sufficient in that regard. We shouldn't be turning to the federal government to make trade deals for California. We can certainly do it ourselves, and we can do it in a way that reflects our needs and our values. I mean, why should the federal government, we're talking about the Senate and the House of Representatives here. Those are the people who are going to basically ratify treaties with our countries on trade. Why should the representatives of the 49 other states have anything to say about the trade deals that California needs? They have a different culture, they have different values than we do, they have different needs than we do. There's no reason that the people of Minnesota or Mississippi or Maine should be putting in policy about what or where California sends its agriculture products, or who can work in California. For example, we talk about immigration. California is a distinct society. It has its own policy preferences, its own public policy needs. And there's no way that you can convince me that people of the other states, particularly those states on the eastern seaboard, should have any say in what trade deals California can make and what kind of immigration policies California should do.
Professor Wade, your response, Professor.
Yes, well, just to point out, I believe it's legally California is required to get review of state deals with the federal government, because the federal government, either the legislation, the Congress and the Senate, or the administration has the final power over trade. Now, we should cooperate with them. Just to point things out, in the audits I've done for various businesses, there's a huge amount of business between Chile and California. Many Chilean companies have relocated in the Central Valley of California. The federal government is to cooperate with us in this regard. I've never heard of any case outside of the slowness of the ratification of these treaties that the federal government has tried to reverse things in California to the detriment of California. But I believe that the state governments that are aggressive, the federal government is in some ways lazy compared to these aggressive state governments, such as California, Virginia, Texas. These governments are much more aggressive in doing things that they want done, and then they have to bring the federal government into the picture in order to get approval. So I don't recommend letting us be independent in this regard, but we must complain to the bureaucracy and to the members of the federal government that we want more support in our individual desires in trade. So I see no problem with the situation that we have now.
A follow-up question for both candidates. Professor Abraham Lowenthal said that California literally invented international trade and led the federal government for the last century, going back to the early 1920s and 1930s. He also said that America's entry into NAFTA and the European market was at California's prompting. Professor Lowenthal has said that California is leading and does dominate, and that does absolutely nothing because 49 states have to approve of trade deals, and most of those states are only 10% dependent on international trade. It's seen as a boutique issue. So we are involved, we are communicative, we are leading, and we still have to wait 10 years. Knowing this, Professor, what would you say Californians should do?
Who's that directed? Is that directed to me?
That's to you, Professor. Professor Frank Henry Wade. You were saying that if California could
Yes.
lead and be better.
Right.
We're doing everything you're saying, and Professor Lowenthal is saying it's not working. What response would you have, sir?
Yes, well, I've heard of this. We should demand that of the federal government, just putting pressure through our senators and Congress people to make the federal government speed up its process and to let them know that it is almost a catastrophic or emergency situation, just like in the coronavirus, that when pressure is put on the federal government, they will come through for us. And I think that we should use the power of our senators and Congress people to make this work. We can't take the attitude that we have to become a separate nation in order to get these trade deals. We have to work within the system.
Candidate Marinelli, given that Professor Lowenthal said that California is heavily involved and is leading, and that hasn't done a whole lot in the last 30 years, what is your recommendation on how to alleviate the problem?
Well, first I'd like to respond to what Professor Wade has been saying. His suggestion is that we somehow pressure the federal government to speed up the process. And that's fine, but the last time that a California governor pressured the federal government to do something, namely to address the fact that California is a donor state, that was Governor Schwarzenegger. He brought up the fact that California is a donor state, and the response of the federal government was to stop publishing the statistical abstract from which he got the data that showed that California was a donor state. And so that was the response of the federal government when the California governor stood up and said, hey, this isn't right. California is not being treated fairly, and we need to have reform. What do? They stop publishing the reports. So I don't think that necessarily the approach that the professor here is presenting is going to be very effective, because what they might do is say, well, now you're going to wait 10 years instead of 5. But to go back to your question, which was on the issue of Professor Lowenthal, I think that California, of course, should set its own trade policies, because the best people to govern California are the people of California.
Professor Wade, a rebuttal, or we can move to the next question, sir.
Yeah, well, I still go back to the statement I made earlier. We can't separate as a state over these type of issues. I feel that if we could communicate more aggressively towards the federal government, we'll have our results that we want. That in the past, when there's been weaknesses in the federal government, they've been addressed through negotiation and so forth. But to make the drastic action of becoming an independent country is just ridiculous. But I will say that you look at the situation in the federal government. We have a Californian as vice president. We have a Speaker of the House who is a Californian, and we have the most senior senators who are also Californians. So using this influence, we should be able to get our deals passed. We should be able to get more cooperation from the federal government. We have a lot of power in the federal government. We should just start utilizing it more effectively. And I must say that Schwarzenegger is all the things that Schwarzenegger did as a governor. Many things were wrong. He liked the idea of playing the part of the outside sheriff, trying to shake up the people in the city through emotional appeals. And he's not the best politician. He never really understood the political process of the state and the federal government. So I wouldn't use him as an example of trying to get something done with the federal government. You have to use cooperation behind the scenes, log rolling. We do something for the senators or our politicians do something for them, and then they will cooperate with us. So we just have a lot of work to be done in getting California's best benefits in the trade area.
Candidate Marinelli, a response, or we can go to the next question? Your call.
Sure, I'll respond briefly. I think that if we're going to say that Governor Schwarzenegger isn't a good example for one reason or the other, then I would say that the other examples that the professor just listed, as in Vice President Kamala Harris, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, also not good examples. Because first of all, Vice President Kamala Harris just told migrants from Central America not to come to America. That's antithetical to California values. The Speaker of the House doesn't represent California or her district. She is the Speaker of the House. She represents the House. And when these politicians, no matter who they are, from what party, when they go from public service in California and they go into public service in the federal government, they've sold their soul to go work for the federal government, the imperial federal government. And so I don't really consider them, even though they come from California, they were born in California, I think they lose their accolades to call themselves Californians when they start serving the evil federal government and government apparatus that's responsible for so much death and misery around the world with its wars and occupation and imperialism. These people go from California, like Kamala Harris. She was the Attorney General. She was a public servant in California, serving the people of California. Now she serves a different master. Why? Because of her own personal agenda, her own personal ambition. She is now serving a different master. That master is responsible for death and destruction around the world. So I think that she loses the right to call herself a Californian.
Professor Wade, you can respond, or we can go to the next question.
Well, I just wanted to interject. I had no idea that candidate Martinelli had such a negative opinion about American foreign policy. I really support America's foreign policy from World War II onward. I devoted 2 years of my life to the war in Vietnam. I am currently, just to tell you my relationship with South Africa, I was a crusader against apartheid in South Africa, and working with USAID, I helped draft the anti-apartheid legislation. If it wasn't for America, the people of South Africa would still be under apartheid. I give full responsibility for the political change of South Africa from a authoritarian, racist entity to democracy, totally to the United States and our anti-apartheid legislation, which was drafted by us. And I also am a crusader against Islamic jihadism in Iraq, Afghanistan, and most recently I was in Bangladesh. I believe that many hundreds of Americans are actually working in these countries trying to change the Islamic extremism so the world can be a better place. But I believe America is a champion of freedom in the world and will continue to do so. Now, the Nancy Pelosi, for example, she does champion the issues of America, but she also considers California her home. So these leaders from California will also try to do the best for the state. And I have no doubt about Kamala Harris will remember the state and try to improve our state as well as fulfill her duties as vice president. Just to give you an example of that, Senator.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor.
Sorry. Okay, yes.
Sorry, just to be fair, Louis Marinelli,
yes.
Would you like to respond or would you like to go to the next question?
Well, there's so much there, but I'll try to remember. But, Nancy Pelosi, for example, have you ever been to her district?
I'll be right back. Keep going.
I mean, if you haven't been to her district, it's a disaster. She doesn't take care of her people in her district. She takes care of herself and her position as Speaker of the House of Representatives. She's representing a larger national agenda of the Democratic Party. That's where her heart is right now. That's what she's doing. She's not serving the people of her district in San Francisco. That place is a mess. San Francisco is a mess. Look at housing costs in the Bay Area. Look at the opiate crisis in the Bay Area. Look at the homelessness in the Bay Area. Why didn't she, if she was a California, serving the people of California, why are those problems so prevalent in her district and in her city? So I wouldn't accept the fact that she's representing her people in California as Speaker of the House. You also mentioned earlier about giving full credit to the United States for the end of apartheid in South Africa. I haven't been to South Africa. You have, so I guess I'll defer to you on that one. But if you're going to give credit to the United States for ending the regime of apartheid in South Africa, then I guess you got to give credit to the United States for bringing on the Islamic regime in Iran that we have today, because they were responsible for that with the installation of the Shah, which was an American-backed leader of Iran, and then that was what led to the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the taking of American hostages. So I think for every example of goodness that you could do or find in the world of what America's done for good in the world, and I accept that there are several examples of good things that America has done. I have a negative view of American foreign policy, but I accept that there are various examples of good things that America has done and will continue to do in the world. But I just take the position that if you weigh the good things that the Americans have done overseas versus the things that they've maybe done with good intentions but have resulted in bad results, I think that the negative outweighs the positive there, even if their intentions were positive. Some of the worst things in the world have happened because of good intentions. And the United States, I think, is the perfect example of that, where they go around from country to country thinking that they want to spread their democracy, spread American way of life, so on and so forth. That is, in many respects and in many examples, has led to problems and not solutions.
Thank you. Professor Wade, your response, or we can go to the next question, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, well, Yeah, well, first of all, I want to point out how the apartheid was solved by America. We said that we wouldn't give landing rights to the South African government. They couldn't bring their planes over here to land in commercial airports unless Mandela was released. And that one item set into motion democracy in South Africa. We had an astute understanding of their regime. America tries to bring democracy and the benefits to the rest of the country, to the rest of the countries of the world. To give you an example, I spent 2 years in Afghanistan, and I hope President Biden does not remove all the troops, because we've kept alive democracy and the normalcy in humanity in that country through support of President Ghani and Abdullah. If it wasn't for these people, the Taliban would take over, and that's a very evil, almost a medieval form of inhumanity. So we're basically fighting the good fight to keep the world a safe place, a decent, ethical place, and a democratic place. Now, getting back to Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco, I was born in San Francisco. I have basically gone overseas and come back. The situation in San Francisco can't be blamed on Nancy Pelosi. It can be blamed on a number of things. Probably the biggest blame should be with our governor, Mr. Gavin Newsom, who had care, not cash. See, before we give the homeless a crazy check and then they would live within their means, now we have NGOs that provide huge amounts of benefits. They're living in first-class hotels and luxury. They're having gourmet meals. They're getting drugs. They're getting medical care. All the compliments of care, not cash program, which was established by this worthless governor. That's the person that brought the mess in San Francisco, not Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you, Professor. Louis Marinelli.
Okay, I was just, I'm talking about Nancy Pelosi just for a second, and then move on to the other topic. Is, when it comes down to politics, is local. When you run for Congress, you're talking to your local constituents about what you're going to do for them. Nancy Pelosi represents a very specific district. It's a small district because it's heavily populated in an enclosed area. Those people vote for her because she says, she's going to represent them, and then she's going to represent the country. So she's failed to represent them. She's failed to deliver help to that district. She's failed to bring things to that district, which is what a congressman typically, or a congresswoman typically tries to do, is to bring support and federal dollars and programs to that district to help that district. That's what helps them keep getting elected. The question then is, how does she keep getting elected? It's not because she's doing anything for her district. It's because she's a wealthy, out-of-touch politician who's in power. And that's why she keeps getting elected. But anyway, you talked earlier, Mr. Wade, about ending apartheid in South Africa, and also talked about the Taliban. I think that apartheid, if I remember correctly, was about 30 years ago when it came to an end. So if the last time that the Americans did anything positive in the world was 30 years ago, I don't think that's a very good indicator of how much good the United States does around the world. You mentioned the Taliban, but I would remind you about who created and funded the Taliban to fight the Soviets in the Cold War. When the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, there was the Americans who were supplying the Taliban with weapons. Now the Taliban have been using those weapons against Americans because of the same goal. They want to get foreigners out of Afghanistan. So the idea that you're going to say that on one hand, thanks to Americans, the Taliban hasn't taken control of Afghanistan or something to that effect is kind of, funny, because it was the Americans who were giving the Taliban some weapons in the 70s and 80s anyway. So you can't have both sides of the coin in that equation.
Professor Wade.
Well, that's a simple way of looking at the conflict in Afghanistan. Afghanistan. I spent 2 years there, and basically, the people that ruined Afghanistan were the Russians, who invaded or who were invited in by the regime and occupied. And we tried to get the Russians out initially by supporting the Mujahideen that evolved into the Taliban. We did not create the Taliban, and there's several movements within Afghanistan that later culminated in the rise of the warlords, of these ancient warlords of the Taliban. And it's we at no time did we ever support these Taliban people that are very evil. They do two things that are totally unacceptable. They treat women like dirt, like slaves, and then they have the Basibara boys, which are boy prostitutes, forced prostitution by young boys, which is just awful. And if we left Afghanistan, the whole country would be sent into a dark age. Now, the idea of Nancy Pelosi not caring about her district, she does. As I say, the care not cash of Gavin Newsom is what created the homeless crisis. So they say, well, let's solve the homeless crisis by having more benefits. So if you have more benefits, more homeless come. I meet homeless people in San Francisco. I met a wealthy Saudi that was living in Section 8 housing that he got after he engineered a divorce with his wife, and he's a wealthy Saudi that's living in Section 8 housing in San Francisco. I met a Cuban that was an officer in the Angolan Civil War that was brought to America in the Mirabel boat lift and now lives in that free housing. We're actually paying for the homeless of the world to come and live in San Francisco.
Thank you, Professor.
Benefits of Gavin Newsom. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can agree with some of that. And in fact, I don't necessarily support just handing out benefits, without end and then expect there to be a resolution of the problem. But I would just point out that the homeless situation and the problems that exist in San Francisco are problems that exist all around California. So they can't just be the result of Gavin Newsom, who was the mayor of San Francisco. You have homelessness in Los Angeles. You have homelessness in San Diego, where I'm from. And so, Gavin Newsom may be responsible for the case in San Francisco, and certainly the cases in San Francisco are among the highest in the state of California. But the issues that I'm talking about, the problems that exist in the San Francisco Bay Area, exist almost everywhere in California. And I believe that as a member of Congress, Nancy Pelosi has a responsibility to try to take care of her district first. And she, in my opinion, doesn't do that.
I'm going to stop it there. We've done 6 back and forth. We're moving on to the next question. I'm taking executive authority, and I thank you both for your flexibility. Here will be the next question. One second. Sorry. I need a second to... In 2013 to 2014, it became known that without being told, President Obama authorized the illegal spying and allies and people around the world through cell phones and laptops. This shocked most of the world, and many European leaders were horrified and disgusted that they were spied on by an allied nation. In fact, the damage was so bad that California lost billions of dollars in lost sales of cell phones and laptops because customers around the planet felt they would be spied on by America. Given that laptops and cell phones and the technology industry is a major industry in California and not in America, is it fair that America illegally and spies on allies and people and ruins the good name of California products, costing us billions of dollars when Californians were never for such warrantless spying? Professor Wade.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. Unfortunately, President Obama, that I supported for the most part, did do a big mistake by spying on our allies. And of course, to my knowledge, spying goes on everywhere. We have spies in our allies. We have spies with our adversaries, and that's all part of the aspect of having different governments in the world. But it was extremely embarrassing, and the result was a loss of sales on the products of California. But I believe that has been recovered, that people don't dwell on that situation. And just to tell you that just recently, people have been talking about Biden with his relationship with Putin, what's going to happen there, and Biden with his relationship with China. I don't consider that much of a threat. I think we should concentrate more on what's going to happen between Latin America and the U.S. How are we going to solve the illegal aliens? We have to give them citizenship. We have to determine how we can let people that want to come in from Latin America, how should we let them come in? And then we have to resolve these differences between people like President Maduro and now the new president of Peru, which seems to be anti-American, and of course the Cuban people that have long awaited for some sort of a relationship, a recognized relationship with the United States. That's where our efforts should be taken in international affairs, not spying on our allies and not debating whether or not basic countries that are not our real enemy, have not sworn to do us harm like China and Russia. We shouldn't concentrate on that so much. We should be concentrating more on people that are critical of us, like Latin America. Yes.
Thank you, Professor. The question to Louis Marinelli: given that California's industry is heavily dependent on technology sales, standard deviations beyond any other American state and the rest of America, and that America-wide spied on allies and its citizens, and that has cost a dearth of sales of laptop and cell phones in Japan, South Korea, China, all of Asia, and the European market to this date, is that fair that Californians have to suffer massive loss of sales because of something they never would have agreed to because they're part of the federal government? Candidate Marinelli.
Well, I mean, according to Professor Wade, I mean, Californians did agree to it because we have such a powerful influence in government. I mean, look at the vice president is Kamala Harris. She's a Californian, right? Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, Californian. Sure, they weren't at the time. The vice president and Nancy Pelosi at the time, I guess, maybe was Speaker of the House, but that just speaks to the fact that we don't have the type of influence that we would like to have and that we should have in the federal government because of California's size, economic power, population, and so on and so forth. We should have the type of influence that we are talking about in the federal government to be able to stop those types of things from happening, but we don't. As you can see, we don't have the ability in the federal government and the influence in the federal government to stop America's foreign wars of imperialism and occupation that Californians oppose and reject. Some of the largest anti-Vietnam wars, Vietnam War protests, some of the largest anti-Iraq War protests happened in California because Californians are a peace-loving people. We oppose war, and yet America is a country that's been at war for almost, well, most of its existence. And so, to what extent does California have influence in the federal government? I think very little, which means that we can secede from the Union and Americans can continue to do what they do as Americans, and that we as Californians no longer have to be guilty by association. And this goes back to what you're talking about with these trade deals. When California is a part of the United States and the United States does wrong, as it typically does, California is guilty by association. And as you're talking about, it loses trade deals. It also loses, reputation points with other countries because, it also makes California the target of terrorism. And why is there terrorism in the world? It's not because people around the world are just inherently evil. It's that America is dropping bombs on their villages from their homes, killing their family members, and folks are going to want to seek retribution. What would we do? What would we do if countries from the Middle East were dropping bombs on California towns? I mean, I'm guarantee you that there'd be Californians who would be taking up arms and finding ways to get themselves to the Middle East so they can start shooting people in the Middle East or blowing up Middle Eastern cities. So it's understandable that that's the case. And as long as California remains part of the United States and part of the foreign war apparatus, California remains a target of terrorism as a result.
Professor Wade, your response, sir. Professor Wade.
Yes. Well, the issues of our foreign policy, California has a great influence in part of the decision making over the foreign policy. We're not just a isolated victim of the formulation of this policy. We've had a big hand in making decisions affecting our country. And I basically I allude back to my earlier statement. Basically, we're motivated to do the best for the world, and our policy is not to hurt people. We have to we have to fight people that want to do us evil. Now, knowing the jihad, knowing the Islamic extremist people in the Middle East that I've come in contact with, they'll come here to California and try to kill us just because we don't follow their extreme nature of Islam. There's nothing we can do. If we separate into another country, they're still going to come after us because we make movies here, because we drink wine, because we go gamble in the Indian reservations. That's what they feel is the abomination that they want to stop. And getting back to the issue of South Africa, we mentioned earlier, we're not finished with South Africa. There's another issue coming which I want to influence as a governor, the fact that the white farmland, which is 90% owned, must be redistributed to Africans to have more correctness in the end of apartheid, and also to help the economy. So we're not finished by any means with the issues of South Africa. South Africa still needs the stewardship of the United States in solving its problems. So there won't be a further conflict between the whites and the blacks of South Africa. But generally speaking, we've been the good guys in the world from World War II onward, and we will continue to be in that role. And California is a major player of making, being part of the United States, making the world a better place.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor. Louis Marinelli.
Well, I think that, as far as being the good guys in the world from World War II on, I think that's from the point of view of an American. But if you talk to most of the people around the world, I think you'll have a different opinion about that. Maybe people in South Africa agree with you, but I think that if you talk to the world population, which is mostly Chinese, Indian, Pakistani, Indonesia, those countries, I guarantee you they don't think that America is a genuine force for good in the world. That would be the most of the planet's population. There's even people in America who don't believe that. I'm amongst them. So there's not even unanimous consent of that idea in America. So I think that if you talk about, what is the general consensus around the world? Is America a force for good or evil? I think it's more towards the evil side, to be honest with you. And also I'd point out the fact that you were talking about, the professor was talking about, California's influence in the federal government, and we're talking here generally about trade deals. So take this into consideration. I mean, I believe, if I remember correctly, that the Constitution gives the power of ratifying treaties to the Senate, and California has 2 senators, and the population of California is about 40 million, and that's greater than the population of the smallest 22 states in the Union combined, which means that 22 states in the Union, you combine their populations, is still smaller than the population of California, yet they have 44 senators amongst them for a population that's less than California's. And California has 40 million and has 2 senators, and 22 states in this country have 44 senators between them. What influence does California have in trade deals? they have 22 states with a population less than California, which means they just need 3 other states to agree with them. And they can pass the trade deals that they want that are not going to reflect the needs and desires and public policy preferences of the people of California, because those states are different from California. We're talking about states like Georgia and Louisiana and Iowa and Maine and Michigan, all those states with different populations with respect to California.
Professor Wade, your response.
Well, yeah, first I'd like to point out that I've worked as a professor teaching in Bangladesh, in Afghanistan, and Iraq. And the majority of the kids in those universities I taught at want to come and live in America. America is considered the golden country, the beautiful city on the hill, and they all have an American dream to come here. We really keep freedom and democracy alive by in the world. And what a dreadful place it would be if there wasn't a country like the United States to have a beacon of freedom and for you to fulfill your dreams here. Now, as far as the Senate and the Congress goes, the Constitution is almost etched in stone. There's really no way that we feel it's a sacred document. It would be nice if we had more representation in the Senate, and we do have a proportional representation to our size in the Congress, but it is through log rolling and the influence of lobbyists in America that the needs of California are get satisfied through influencing these other senators. So that's the old the old political way of dealing since the time of the revolution. We can't really change that. To change that, we need a major overhaul in the Constitution, and it's just not going to take place. The Constitution is a stable document that is very difficult to change, but we do use our influence through lobbyists. The financial interests of Californians do get votes in order to establish what we need through the lobbyists. So I'm not wishing to change our constitutional system. Just we have to deal with it, try to influence it, and be successful influencing it.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go to our last question now. Here's the last question. Recently, Joe Biden refused to hold China accountable for the genocide of the Uyghur Muslims. He said so live on CNN television. He also said that he would do absolutely nothing to hold the Saudi king responsible for the live dismemberment of a reporter for telling the news. He also upheld the trade war on China. He also initially wanted to uphold the punishment caps on refugees initiated by Donald Trump until he was called out by liberals and reversed himself. Additionally, he wants to continue Donald Trump's border wall and the kids in cages, and has refused media access to the children in cages, and went on television to tell people from Latin America not to come. Kamala Harris has been in charge of the border situation, has never visited the border in months, and has done so bad at dealing with children in cages that the Biden administration is now publicly distancing themselves from the Harris administration. She too, like Joe Biden, told Latin America people not to come. If Joe Biden is the decent version of America, the opposite of Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris is there to represent California values, but they both backed up the building the border wall, children in cages, and telling immigrants to, quote, not come to America, what faith can Californians have that their values will be upheld in the federal government? Professor Wade.
Well, first, let's go to the Uyghur situation. I lived in China for a number of years, and I know about the Uyghurs. Number one, the Chinese government is trying to assimilate these people. They are, they should be a productive member of society. China does not hurt its minorities. They spend several $billions a year preserving the culture of their minorities. The same with the people from Tibet. The Tibetan people are being assimilated by China so they can be productive people, and their culture is being upheld through the tourism of the Han Chinese people and the expenditures of the Chinese government. It's just a shame the Dalai Lama does not get off of his high horse and try to negotiate and be part of Tibet again. So I have no criticism of China. I think they're, as far as the Uyghurs go, they're doing the right thing. Trade deals we might be able to improve, but I'm not I'm not privy to the issues involved in the trade deal. Just that we try to do the best. As far as Saudi Arabia goes, I love Saudi Arabia. I spent 7 years there. I do not believe the issue of Muskogee. I think it is not accurately reported. And let me tell you this. In 1980, I was at a military base in the Persian Gulf, and we thought the Iranians were going to come over the Persian Gulf, and the Saudi commander said, if the Persians come with their hydrofoil, you can surrender, he says to the Americans, but we're going to fight these people. And the Americans on the base, about 30 of us, we said, we'll fight those people with you. In other words, I was willing to go down with the Saudi ship in 1980. That's how much faith I have in Saudi Arabia as being our friends and part of our world, our free world. Now, as far as Biden's relationship with the refugees, they have to revamp it. I give them time to establish a program.
Thank you, Professor. Louis Marinelli, given that Californians reacted in massive disgust to many policies by Donald Trump, including his way of treating immigrants, the border wall, tolerating dictatorships and humanitarian disasters, and the continuation of those policies, to the point that the New York Times 2 weeks ago recently said they have trouble seeing the difference between the Trump and Biden administrations. Why should Californians have faith that the federal government will uphold their California values? Marinelli, please.
Well, Californians shouldn't have faith that they're going to uphold California values. The simple truth of the matter is this, and it's really the basis of the whole campaign for California independence, is that no matter who is president of the United States, nothing changes. In fact, things that change often change for the worse. And California in the United States, its position is not getting any better. Now, when California joined the Union, it was to join the Union on equal footing with the other states. It doesn't have equal footing with the other states. Not even in the House of Representatives. I think California is ranked about number 26 in terms of representation when it comes to the number of constituents in a district to each representative. It's not equal across the United States. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio, as many people may believe. California, I think, ranks number 26 or something in that field. And so California does not have equal footing in the United States. And so what we want to do is separate California from the United States, so that we can have Californians govern California. That's the best group of people to govern California are Californians, people who have California values. And in California, of course, there's going to be differences of opinion, but we're all Californians choosing California's future. It's better than saying, let's allow the representatives and politicians from 49 other states decide what California's future is going to be like. So the bottom line is that California is a distinct society because we have a distinct set of values. We have a distinct population, a history, culture that's separate from the United States. And that's the basis by which we are going to, under the UN Charter, pursue self-determination through a referendum on independence.
Thank you. Professor Wade, your response, sir.
Well, one thing I have to point out, California is the second largest delegation to Congress. Now, you said that the ratio of some sort makes it rank 26. That's like standing on your head and looking in the mirror. No, California is the second largest delegation to Congress. Only this year, the last election, New York has more delegates than we do. We have more delegates in Congress. We have more members of the Electoral College than any other state, or it rotates between New York and California. And then when you consider the fact that we have the Speaker of the House, that's a Californian, and we have the Vice President, that's a Californian, we do have a great deal of influence in the federal government, and we should more effectively use this influence. We have the senior senator, Dianne Feinstein, with a huge seniority, and we should effectively use these powers that we have. And it is inappropriate to look at California as being a victim of the federal government. We are the federal government. We just have to have a better understanding of what our goals are, and to accomplish these goals. And number one, another point is we can't leave the federal government, even if we wanted to. There is no mechanism in the Constitution for us to leave. States have tried to leave in the past. The Civil War is an example. They cannot leave, and we don't want to leave. But the fact is that because California has so much power, we can threaten or think in terms of leaving to leverage our influence over the federal government. I have no problem with that, but we should just state that since California has a huge population and a huge part of the economy, we should leverage this power into getting a better deal for our state in regard to the federal government. But as far as changing the Constitution or dissolving the Constitution is just out of the question. It's unrealistic. As I said, the Confederate States of America tried that in 1865 with no result.
Thank you, Professor. Louis Marinelli.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to talk about this point I'm making about the unfairness of representation in Congress. Because, if you look at, for example, California's population is about 40 million. And with those 40 million, but for those 40 million people, we have 53 congressional districts. So if you do the math, we talked about in the beginning of this debate, talking about math, we do the math, that's approximately one representative for every 755,000 people. That's just math. However, if you go to Wyoming, where they have one representative for the whole state, population of Wyoming is 580,000 people. That means effectively they have one representative for every 580,000 people. Alaska has a population of 730,000 people, one representative. So Alaska has one representative for every 730,000 people. Wyoming has a population of 580,000 people. That's one representative for every 580,000 people. California has one representative for every 755,000 people. If we had the same representation of Wyoming, for example, one representative for every 580,000 people, inevitably we would have a bunch more representatives in Congress. That would be the type of influence that we deserve as Californians, on equal footing with the other states. That's what I'm talking about. Why does Wyoming have one representative for 580,000 people, and California has one representative for every 755,000 people? That's a great number of representatives if we go to the same ratio 1-to-1 as Wyoming has. And so that's not fair for California to not have enough representation in Congress based on its population. And that's something that we need to fix. Or, as I propose, leave the Union, let the Americans govern themselves as they see fit, and then California governs itself as it sees fit.
Professor Wade.
Yeah, well, I still say that California has the largest delegation. Now, the issue of small populations having equal representation, that was determined in the Constitutional Convention of 1787. The upper house or Senate, each state or each colony would be given 2 representatives, and you could see the inequality back in 1787. Rhode Island and Connecticut each had 2 representatives, but the big states like New York, Pennsylvania, and Virginia also had 2. So this issue has been around for 250 years, and the fact is that we're an entity, one country. We've been in one country for 250 years, and as I say, the lobbyists will make up any gap in understanding of the issues through their influence of the different politicians, so they can come along to have a majority over certain issues. But California still dominates all the other states because of our immense size, and the lower house was done on the basis of population, and the population centers are represented larger for the bigger states than the smaller states. So I have no problem with little states or little clusters of people having technically the same power as the larger states, because you have the lobbyists influencing these people, so they come to the same conclusion as the politicians from the larger states. What you're really proposing, if you want to make California independent, is a dissolution of America. Because if California was to be removed, very soon the other states would follow, and we'd be one series of very weak little countries that could be gobbled up by the larger superpowers that are left in the world. And I don't want to see that. We should keep our nation together so we can deal with the other countries.
Thank you, Professor. Louis Marinelli.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just wanted to point out that, yes, California does have the largest delegation, but it still wouldn't, I mean, it needs to be larger if it was going to be equal representation. Wyoming has 1 for every 580,000. We have 1 for every 750,000. So if there was equal representation, math tells us that we would have more seats in Congress. It would be even larger. That's the point, is that we are underrepresented. Yes, we have the largest delegation, but that's underrepresentation. And so that's a problem that we, need to fix, because the Constitution, I believe it says, or at least it used to say, that there's supposed to be 1 representative for every 30,000 residents. They removed that part of the Constitution. But in the beginning, it was supposed to be 1 representative for every 30,000 people. So there was a set ratio of 1 for every 30,000. Now it's 1 in California anyway. It's 1 for 750,000. Whereas in Wyoming, it's 1 for 580,000. So we need to go back to a 1-to-1 ratio where every state has the same ratio. That would be equal representation. And now the last thing I'll point out is that, this whole compromise that was made at the Constitutional Convention that started the country was made at a time when there was 13 states, and the difference between the least and most populous state was 13-1. Whereas, there was 13 more people in the most populous state compared to the least populous state. So that wasn't such a big gap. But now, the gap between the most populous state and the least populous state, I believe, is about 68 or 69 or maybe 70-1, which means that California, basically there's 70 Californians for every 1 person from Wyoming. And so that's another disparity, because if they barely passed that compromise in the 1780s, whereby they allowed for the states to have 2 senators and then in the Senate, and then they distributed the representation in the House of Representatives based on population. That was
Thank you.
controversial at the time, and it was only 13-1 difference. Now it's a difference of 70-1. I doubt that would have passed in today's day and age.
It's a very passionate discussion with good points on both sides. We're a little bit past the clock, so we're going to go to closing statements. Each candidate will be allowed 2 minutes to say whatever they would like. They can respond to the other candidate. They could bring up new points or just talk about their campaign. Professor Wade, are you available, sir?
Yes. Someone tried to phone me on my connection. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, sir. Are you ready to give a 2-minute closing
Okay,
statement?
real good. So I'll speak close to my my phone. Okay, the points I want to make is that I have some other issues that I want to be passed in the state as governor. Let's go. One last statement for South Africa. I want to use my power as governor to influence the European background farmers to give up their farms to allow the farmland to be distributed to African farmers to help the economies of the rural areas of South Africa and to help the economy of South Africa in general, because that issue is coming up very soon in South Africa. Now, within California, I feel that we should amend the Constitution, well, not amend, but influence the Constitution somehow to revisit the power that we gave the Constitution in 1787 to print the money. That's the only thing I want California to take back. We should have our deficit made part of the national debt, so we have unlimited spending power for our benefits here in California. Now, in addition to that, I want free arbitration courts for civil and labor disputes. And this is an arbitration court like the small claims court, where anyone can walk in without having to pay for a lawyer. And you cannot refute the verdict of the arbitration court. If you want to refute going into court, then the one party should go to a regular court. But once you've established the arbitration court, you have to follow it. Now, this will help labor disputes and housing disputes in California. And in addition to that, I wanted, as a CPA and a tax practitioner for 40 years, I want to give benefits to the children. The child care credit should be below the line, which means it is in effect a refund to you. And the tax credit for children should be very high in a way to reduce the amount of abortions, because most abortions occur because people can't afford children. And also theft and casualty losses, like due to earthquakes and floods, that should be reimbursed to the taxpayer in a below-the-line deduction, not in an above-the-line deduction. I know that taxing is very technical, but believe me, if you make it an above-the-line deduction.
I apologize. We are out of time. So thank you, Professor Wade. We're trying to keep it to 2 minutes for closing statements. We're going to go to Louis Marinelli. Louis Marinelli, 2 minutes for your closing statement.
I don't know if I should talk yet because he's still talking and doesn't know that we
have lost due to earthquakes and floods.
Professor,
so those would be my major changes as governor.
Thank you, Professor. We're going to end the section. Thank you for being here, Professor. Deeply appreciated. Louis Marinelli, 2 minute closing statement starting now.
Yes, I would like to use my 2 minutes to talk about the legality and the constitutionality of state secession, because that's one area where a lot of people are misinformed. I believe even the professor believes that secession from the Union is illegal and unconstitutional, but that's not the case. In fact, it's the preferred method for us to secede from the Union is by following the path laid out by the Supreme Court in Texas versus White, where in 1869, the Supreme Court ruled that a state can secede from the Union through consent of the states. What the court specifically said, and I quote, the union between Texas and the other states was as complete, as perpetual, and as indissoluble as the union between the original states. There was no place for reconsideration or revocation except through revolution or through consent of the states. The Supreme Court literally wrote in their ruling that a state can secede from the union through consent of the states. And through that consent of the states, California can legally, peacefully, and constitutionally secede from the union. Take note that the Supreme Court did not say through the consent of Congress or by constitutional amendment, as the media often reports. California does not need a constitutional amendment to secede. The Constitution does not establish this requirement and does not say anything about that in the Supreme Court's ruling. In fact, the Constitution itself is silent on the issue of secession. And so that leads to the last point. As we know, the Constitution was designed to limit government power. And it reserves all other powers that are not specifically given to the federal government to the states. It's the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment says that if the Constitution does not specifically enumerate a power to the federal government, then that power is reserved to the state. Now, the Constitution does not say anything about secession. It doesn't say it's possible. It doesn't say it's impossible. It doesn't say it's legal. It doesn't say it's illegal. So it doesn't say anything. So that means you look at the 10th Amendment, which says that if the Constitution does not give the federal government power in some field or some area on some topic, that topic power is reserved to the state. So that means the state issue, which means we're going to take it in the state level. First, we're going to make a declaration of independence in California. We're going to have that approved by the voters in California. And then we're going to go to the other states in this union, state legislatures, and get a resolution supporting the right of California to secede from the union. And when we have a majority of those states that pass a resolution saying that California can secede from the union, we will have what's called consent of the states as required by Supreme Court precedent and how a state can secede from the union. So this is entirely legal, entirely possible. Yes, it's a lot of work that needs to be done. Yes, it's a difficult job to achieve. But it is possible, it is legal, and it is constitutional. And California will become an independent country through a legal and peaceful method.
Thank you both for being here. Both of you were awesome. That ends this day's debates. Tomorrow, it's Saturday at 9 a.m. You can see more debates with candidate Marinelli and candidate Kapelovitz. Tomorrow at 9, special one-on-one debate. Additionally, tomorrow at 1 p.m., we will have our routine recall candidates debates. Thank you both for being here. This ends our session. Appreciate both of your attention.
Thank you.